Chapter 1056. The cold wind was howling. With the coming of the new year, the outer islands also ushered in the first heavy snow. The great war that broke out in the south of the island did not affect the harbor and the inner city, so although others heard about it, they could only know how fierce the battle was from a few people. The outside world had more speculations about the city of Mordor. When they learned that the demon army was led by Orcus, many gods' churches were shocked and quickly sent the news back. Mordor City's reaction ability and hidden trump cards were really amazing. In the case of facing the Steel Abyss Legion head-on, they were still able to protect the inner city without any losses, and they resisted this attack in just half a day. This was something that no kingdom in the material plane could do. Even if there were gods, it would be difficult. There was no doubt that the city of Mordor still had many hidden cards that they did not know. Although everything ended quickly, the pain was unbearable. However, the pain they brought was unavoidable. After the high priest cleaned up the battlefield, he sent people to organize a grand funeral. Sauron's church and believers suffered a serious blow. More than 20,000 believers died in the attack of the Abyss army. About 20 priests were killed by the liches and the undead. Although their souls could return to the kingdom of God, they were still dead after all. 3 towns that had been fully established were turned into ruins. The city of Mordor lost more than 10 million kindler directly in this battle. It would take more resources to rebuild the towns and migrate the population in the future. This was a blatant attack. The purpose was undoubtedly to attack Sauron's power. If the city of Mordor had not reacted quickly, Sauron's church would have been destroyed in an instant. The enemy must pay the price. No matter who was behind the scenes, Sauron must make them pay the price. However, the most important thing now was to restore order in the city of Mordor and mobilize troops to guard all places. Sauron was not sure if this was the only wave of the enemy's attack. We must fight back. Sauron stood on the high platform of the great temple, listening to the prayers of the believers outside and the cries of countless souls. More than 30,000 civilians died in the city of Mordor. The souls of these civilians were collected by the temple. Because there were too many of them at once and Sauron was worried about Mingi, he could only ask the oracles from another world to send them to the Holy Kingdom in batches. Sauron suspected that this attack was orchestrated by Naruto. However, there was something wrong with Naruto attacking him so recklessly. Sauron suspected that someone else was behind this. There were many gods among the gods who wanted to test him. It's not time to make a move on Naruto yet. If I remember correctly, he will soon hold the promotion ceremony. Sauron's gaze pierced through space as he muttered, "However, since you dared to attack me, you must pay the price. Looks like it's time to start a war in the Abyss." The enemy did not make a move openly. This was the problem. Sauron could not gather the gods in the alliance to deal with Naruto. However, since Orcus attacked and was now killed by Sauron, and his soul escaped into the staff of Orcus, then he had to do something. The most valuable revenge at the moment was to cut off Orcus's wings in the Abyss. The Abyss, the third layer, the Forgotten Land. After nearly 2 months of silence, behind the Golumba Arena, in a magnificent palace built near a volcano, the heavy obsidian gate slowly opened. Later, the figure of the Baelor leader, Sauron, came out of it. Behind him were 6 Baelor who had completed their evolution. At the same time, there was also a Baelor who came to join Sauron. He came from the dark well of the bottomless abyss. He was an evil and powerful existence. Master. 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 The high-class succubus maids who had been guarding the door immediately greeted Sauron. They flapped their small demon wings to welcome him. 7 or 8 high-class succubus maids surrounded Sauron, obediently waiting for orders. The second to speak was the goblin demon warlock. Since the Golumba arena became bigger and bigger, the power of the goblins was severely weakened. Demons dominated the place, especially when more and more high-grade demons tried to join Sauron to gain power. The status of the goblins was even worse. The generosity and cruelty of Sauron the Beheader had spread throughout the Abyss. Many demons had joined the Abyss because of the temptation of benefits. This made the number of demons and goblins more and more unstable. The goblins knew very well that only Sauron could guarantee their status. Otherwise, they would have been devoured by the demons and demons long ago. The last to speak was the leader of the demon guards in the Golumba arena. He was a powerful assassin demon who was responsible for training some powerful demon guards. Sound the alarm. Summon the demon army. Sauron's burly figure came out. The wide demon wings were like a pair of dragon wings when they opened. He glanced at the assassin demon's happy expression and said slowly, "War is coming. Let us destroy. Let us conquer." Dong dong dong. The dull sound of the bell echoed throughout the Golumba arena. This bell was only rung during the most grand competition battles and when the army was summoned. There was no doubt that there was no competition now. The only explanation was that the great Baelor Lord Sauron was summoning his demon army. So, this only meant one thing in the abyss: war was coming. What was absolutely different from the material plane was that when the bell to summon the demon army rang, everyone's face was not surprised and nervous, but uncontrollable excitement and fighting spirit. Demons thirsted for war. Demons thirsted for killing. More than once, there were high-grade demons who thought that Sauron was too kind. This was not a compliment in the abyss. These high-grade demons who came over thought that Sauron should start a war. War was necessary. They needed a war to gain merit, a war to prove their strength, a war to expand their territory, and a war to strengthen themselves. All the high-grade demons who came over thought that Sauron should at least choose a secondary demon lord as an enemy. The huge demon army needed a target. They needed to eliminate enemies and plunder wealth. They also needed to use this to gain a higher status. It would be best to become a low-grade demon lord. These demons thought that the days in the Golumba arena were a bit idle. They trained every day, summoned more demons, occasionally cleaned up the wilderness and dealt with demons. These were not serious matters for the high-grade demons. The only thing they did was to fight and kill. Ha ha ha. Is the war finally going to start? A burly Baelor laughed as he rushed out of the tavern. Demons did not need ordinary food and they did not even have certain organs. Drinking was a pastime that only high-ranked demons could enjoy, and only special wine could make them feel it. This kind of wine was almost poisonous to humans. A Glabriza figure also came out of the tavern. Almost all the demons who were qualified to enter the tavern were high-grade demons. The middle-grade and low-grade demons were basically in the military camp, or they were carrying out cleaning tasks in the wilderness. The whole Golumba arena was boiling. The high-grade demons who had nothing to do appeared one after another. They either flapped their demon wings and flew into the air or directly teleported to the square. In the war against the Kingdom of Fear, a large number of new high-grade demons were born in the Golumba arena. They had been eager for new battles to make themselves stronger. The 5 six-armed snake demons quickly swam across the wide street. Their reaction speed was very fast and when they arrived they were already fully armed. At this time, in the big square of the Golumba arena, there were nearly 100 high-grade demons gathered together. At the top of the list were the 6 higher demons that stood out from the rest. They were the High Baelor O'Leary, the 6-armed snake demon leader, Ryz, the Glabriza messenger, Frost, the assassin instructor, Kryla, the goblin sorcerer, Milt, and the Soul Calibur captain, Mortier. These 6 high-grade demons all had a characteristic that was, they all wore a special magic ring on their fingers. Tap tap tap. The crisp sound of boots sounded, and the figure of the succubus boss, Renalise, also appeared. The demons came very quickly and were all very excited. Some high-grade demons whispered to each other and seemed to be guessing who the target was this time. Soon. With the breath of the raging fire, Sauron's burly figure descended from the sky. He looked down at the many high-grade demons in front of him and then slowly said, "The time for war has come. It's time for us to conquer and destroy the next target." One by one, Balrogs appeared behind Sauron. Although many high-grade demons had been guessing that the Lord had not appeared for so long because he was cultivating Balrogs, when so many Balrogs really appeared in front of them, they could not help but feel a little shocked. Orcus has fallen in the material plane. A huge beheading sword appeared in Sauron's palm. He held the flame whip and pointed to the void and said in a deep voice, "All the planes he controlled have now become ownerless. The Ghoul King Dorison betrayed Yennegu, and now Orcus is dead again. Now this ghoul has become an old dog that has lost its claws and teeth. This is an opportunity for us. A chance to really rise in the abyss. My servants, let us summon the abyss army. Go and trample Thanatos. Go and conquer Naratel. These places belong to us. Go and summon your servants. Go and summon your allies. We want to conquer these plains. Finally, hang the head of the Ghoul King, Dorison, on the top of the palace of the White Kingdom. P.S. It's a pity that Buddha's math is not good, or I'll tell you how much impact a 1-ton weapon has at supersonic speed. Chapter 1057. The Undead King Orcus. Orcus was once a mortal. No one knew the details about him when he was a mortal. They only knew that he was already a bloated fatty back then and was proficient in certain spells. After his death, his soul came to the outer plane and became the lowest level of larvae, and he began his struggle in the abyss. Finally, he became one of the most powerful demons in the abyss. After Orcus became the demon lord, his infamy spread across all the plains. He claimed that he was the creator of the undead, a strange creature that was far away from the negative energy plane. Orcus became even more infamous because he knew the secret of the living dead. No one knew when Orcus began to rule over Thanatos. There were rumors that Orcus also ruled over other layers of the abyss, but it was certain that it was a long time ago. It was said that Orcus created the first batch of Death Knights, and there were a total of 12 of them. These Death Knights were all righteous men when they were alive. Orcus, who was killed by Sorin, was not in his true undead king form. This was because Orcus' stats in his peak form were very abnormal. Strength 54, Dexterity 25, Constitution 42, Intelligence 34, Wisdom 30, Charm 42. Note: the data of the undead king's peak form will be posted in the book after this chapter. Orcus' territory was Thanatos. Thanatos was on the 113th floor of the abyss. This floor was very cold, filled with ice, thin air and gloomy moonlight. This floor belonged to the Tana demons, but it also belonged to the undead. In fact, this floor had a slight negative energy characteristic. Even so, purgatory moss and mushrooms still grew at the edge of the frozen ground. Tombstones of all kinds, imaginable and unimaginable, decorated the frozen landscape. Some stood alone, while others were gathered together randomly. It was like a small graveyard. Undead creatures were everywhere. It was not easy to reach Thanatos from the upper level of the abyss, unless one had a super-advanced teleportation gate. Or else, to reach Thanatos, one had to pass through another layer, the frozen waste. The 23rd layer of the bottomless abyss was an extremely cold plain. The ice layer was several miles deep, and there was no sign of human habitation. The distant sun looked even dimmer than the moon in the physical world. The frozen moor was under the jurisdiction of the frost giants. They served the frost giant king of Koschurch, their demon prince. The frost giant mages and their prince lived in the glacier castle. It was a castle that was built between two towering ice peaks and was on the verge of collapsing. Spring would never come to the frozen wilderness. Most of the inhabitants there lived in underground fortresses or caves. Conquering Orcus's territory was not an easy task. It took Sauron 3 days to gather his demon army. Most of the middle and low-level demons in the abyss were free-range. They did not need regular food, but they needed flesh and blood to nourish themselves. More importantly, they needed the power of souls. For this battle, Sauron had gathered all the demons in the wilderness. There were 3 demonic mercenaries serving him, but the main force was still nearly 200,000 demons. Among them, the middle-level demons accounted for a large proportion. Most of them had experienced the War of the Kingdom of Fear and survived. Before launching the attack, Sauron had one more thing to do. That was to face another difficult target. The 23rd layer of the abyss. When Sauron's figure appeared in the frozen waste, he immediately called the demon warlocks to open a portal. The one who ruled here was a demon lord controlled by anger. Sauron did not intend to deal with him too much. The tributary of the Styx River flowed along the upper plain to here, and this place led directly to Thanatos, the territory of Orcus. A dark red teleportation door opened. With the operation of the demon warlocks, Sauron quickly arrived at another cold land. Let's start. Sauron waved his hand and threw a large number of precious materials on the ground. Then more than 10 demon warlocks and lesser balers began to work. They needed to build a portal. A portal that was large enough to complete the arrival of more than 100,000 demons. In order to complete the process as soon as possible, Sauron borrowed the power of his body and summoned the emissary from the Kingdom of Shadow. With the help of the emissary, it only took half a day for a huge portal to appear on the border of Thanatos. Near the barracks of the Golumba arena, a dark red light appeared. Countless demons howled excitedly and then entered the portal under the control of the balers. The mighty demon army began to invade. As the main force of the vanguard, there were 6 balers, 5 assassins, 7 six-armed snake demons, and about 3,000 berserk demons and berserk demons. After they reached the 113th layer of the abyss, they quickly built a simple fortress under the command of the higher demons. You could not expect too much from the demons' construction ability. This ugly steel fortification was completed in less than 3 hours. Its purpose was only to protect the portal. Leave a group of balers to protect this place. Sauron waved his hand and summoned the vanguard that had arrived. He said in a deep voice, "Clean up the undead nearby." There were many undead in Thanatos. Within the range of the naked eye, there seemed to be tombs everywhere. Countless undead wandered here, including Boda corpses, death knights, high necromancers, vampires, skeletal warriors and so on. The power of this plane had been infiltrated by Orcus. When souls entered here, there was a 50% chance that they would become undead and not transform into demons. This was a change to the plane's laws, so this plane had been infiltrated with negative energy. Yes, sir. Master. A Baylor stood up and then summoned his subordinates to attack the surroundings. About 3,000 demons began to clean up the surroundings. At the same time, a group of Baylors found a mountain under Sauron's command. Then they began to set up a huge magic array. The mighty abyssal army was continuously teleported over. Because it was close to the kingdom of the main body, there was no need to worry about defense. This time, Sauron gathered more than 70% of the army to attack here. The teleportation circle was constantly running. The scene that happened in Motor City was repeated. Soon, an army of nearly 100,000 demons had completed the teleportation and piled up the entire plain. But this time the undead became the invaders. Sauron led the demon army to attack here with anger and hatred. The invasion of the demons quickly alerted the undead here. The Death Knights that Orcus had once created had noticed the abnormality. They began to gather the undead and quickly set up defensive fortresses, skeletal fortresses. An army of more than 100,000 demons was densely packed on the cold plains. Countless demons anxiously waited for Sauron's order, ready to launch a full-scale war against the gathered undead. However, Sauron did not appear in the demon army. His figure led the Baylors to occupy a mountain peak. Master. The magic array has been set up. The lady boss of Succubus appeared in front of Sauron with a group of demon warlocks. Behind her was a large group of demon warlocks and demons who were good at magic. Night witches, hags, Yugros, slaughterers and so on. Very good. Sauron's huge body turned around and nodded with satisfaction. Start the ritual. A Baylor stood up. He followed the demon warlocks to the center of the magic array, which was a huge platform. The lady boss of Succubus walked in front of the Baylors with a dagger in her hand. Then she waved the dagger and pierced the Baylors' hearts. Boiling hot blood gushed out from the wound. This dagger had evil power and quickly drained the life of the Baylors in front of her. Then countless blood gushed out and flowed onto the magic array. A raging fire appeared on the magic array. The temperature around rose sharply. This was an evil sacrificial magic array. It needed the life of a Baylors to start. Sauron's huge body entered the interior of the mountain through a dug passage. This passage went thousands of meters underground and connected to the magma vein. His huge body slowly entered the magma pool. On the magic array outside the mountain peak, the life of the Baylors was completely drained. A surge of magic poured into the magic array and passed to Sauron's body at the same time. Burn. Spurt. Obey my call. Elves from the fire plane. Expel the coldness of this world. Bring the scorching heat here. In the name of Sauron, the Baylor Lord. Elves from the fire plane. Erupt your anger and scorching heat. Use the scorching heat to dispel the coldness here. Turn this place into a new land of flames. The earth was trembling. The entire plain was experiencing violent and strange earthquakes. Under Sauron's summon, especially after sacrificing a Baylors, the magma pool in front of him seemed to be boiling and surging. Then the passage to the fire plane was opened. Under the summon of the name of Baylor Lord, countless ancient elves from the fire plane responded to Sauron's summon. They poured into this plane and brought with them a scorching aura. Rumble. The top of the mountain began to collapse and crack. Under the scorching aura, Sauron led countless flame elves out of the mountain. The scorching hot magma erupted from the top of the mountain. As the scorching heat spread, the flame elves cheered. Under the summon of the name of the Baylor Lord, they directly turned the mountain in front of them into an active volcano that was erupting. Magma spewed out. Dust floated in the sky, and the flame sprites cheered. The temperature of the entire plain was affected by the land of fire elements. With this active volcano as the center, the ice within a radius of several hundred kilometers was melting at a speed visible to the naked eye. Sauron was transforming this plain. He summoned the elves from the fire plane in the name of the Baylor Lord, and the first step he did was to detonate an active volcano in this plain. Chapter 1058. The earth trembled. The volcano that Sauron ignited erupted in a prince-style manner. This was considered the most powerful form of volcanic eruption. It could spray volcanic ash up to 45 kilometers in the air and cover a large area. This type of volcanic eruption could form a powerful pyroclastic flow. Its characteristic was volcanic gas and volcanic ash that was ejected into the stratosphere. A short eruption could end in a day, but it could also last for days or even months. A longer eruption would start with the formation of gray clouds. Sometimes it would be accompanied by a pyroclastic flow. It could spew out large amounts of lava and cause the crater to collapse, forming a crater. The fine ash could cover a large area. Due to the uniqueness of the plain, Sauron could not turn this place into a supervolcano even if he sacrificed a Balrog. However, there was no doubt that this violent eruption had completely changed some of the characteristics of this plane. This was because the negative energy characteristic given by Orcus was gradually injected with a trace of characteristics from the fire elemental plane under the guidance of Sauron's huge power and the interference of the elves from the Land of Flames. As mentioned before, all planes had channels that connected to the elemental plane. Thanatos was injected with characteristics from the negative energy plane, allowing low-level undead to automatically revive in this plane. When souls entered this plane, they would not become demon worms due to the cold environment and negative energy. Instead, they would become many undead such as skeletons, zombies, Boda corpses, and so on. This was not what Sauron needed. He did not need undead, nor did he need undead that could continuously revive and grow stronger through killing. The tributary of the river Styx passed through this plane. Under the influence of Orcus' power, more than 90% of the souls in this plane would become undead. The remaining layer would become demons and be quickly destroyed by the undead. Therefore, there were tens of millions of undead wandering here. Of course, most of the undead were like abyssal worms. They were weak and needed tens of thousands of battles to produce a high-grade undead. This was an undead farm. Volcanic ash covered a large area of land. The sky darkened, but the temperature did not get colder. Sauron's flame elves had caused the ground to heat up. At the same time, because the channel to the fire elemental plane had been opened, the magma layer in this world was rapidly expanding. As long as this formation was maintained, the characteristics of the plane would gradually change. Transforming a plane wasn't an easy task. If it was done by the main body, it might be faster. However, Sauron needed some time to accumulate experience. We can attack now. Sauron's naked figure walked out of the lava pool at the top. The succubus maids on both sides quickly walked over and put a cloak on him. The rapidly rising temperature made the Balrogs excited. Under the leadership of the Baelor, Sauron's main demon army began to advance. Sauron did not intend to participate in this battle. Because it was difficult for him to improve his strength by killing low-level undead, he had more important things to do. Have people prepare the soul crystals. Sauron opened his huge demonic wings and soared into the sky. Then he ordered the succubus lady boss, summon the goblin demon warlock. We can start preparing for the real ceremony now. This was a plain war. Just killing some undead would not determine the real victory. What Sauron needed was to completely control this plane. Inside the portal, a large number of soul crystals were transported out. These were the spoils of war from the Boda corpses and ghosts that the demon army had destroyed. These relatively ordinary soul crystals had other uses. They were the key to determining whether Sauron could rule this plane. A fierce battle had broken out. The demon army of more than 100,000 began to advance toward the Bone Fortress. All the high-grade demons led their subordinates to fight the Death Knights. For a moment, the entire plane had turned into a battlefield. At this moment, there were already millions of undead gathered. If they were to compare the number of cannon fodder, the undead were no less than the demons. Not to mention there were countless corpses in this plane. Under the summoning of the Lich, a large number of skeletons and skeleton warriors were immediately resurrected. It was as if there was no end to them. The characteristics of the plane still gave them abilities. Under the effect of the characteristics of the plane, Thanatos undead spells could be enhanced by 1 to 3 casting levels. After all, this was Orcus territory. Sauron spread his huge demonic wings and flew to the border of the plane. There were already hundreds of goblin demon warlocks waiting here. Some powerful night witches and Anababas were also waiting for Sauron to bring them here. We can begin. Sauron nodded at a legendary level Yugoloth. Immediately after, the Yugoloth ordered its subordinates to summon a boat of the river Styx. The Yugoloth had always been one of the ferrymen of the river Styx. Only they could easily come into contact with the river Styx. Do it, the Yugoloth roared. Then the earth shook violently. A crack appeared on the border of the land. The river Styx's water flowed into the land through the crack. A huge pit appeared in front of them. There were countless runes around it. These were all set up by the goblin demon warlocks, night witches and Anababas. The river Styx's water flowed into it. Countless undead wailed. With the help of the Yugoloth, a huge pool of the river Styx appeared in front of Sauron. The rich power of death filled the air. Sauron slowly came to the huge pool and took out a bottle of dark red liquid. This was the essence from the Abyss blood pool. Sauron opened the crystal bottle in his hand and poured the essence of the Abyss blood pool into the pool of the river Styx. He then cut open his palm and roared, "Chaos!" The demon lord's blood fell into the pool. The entire pool of the river Styx suddenly boiled crazily. Countless souls wailed in it. The dark red essence of the blood pool spread at a speed visible to the naked eye. With the help of Sauron's demon lord's blood, the pool of the river Styx was quickly dyed red. The passage in the distance had been sealed. Under the effect of the essence of the blood pool, the pool of the river Styx was quickly assimilated into a huge pool of blood. Pour in the soul crystals. The demons carried baskets of low-grade soul crystals and tossed them into the newly formed blood pool. Then bubbles appeared in the center of the blood pool. Countless pieces of flesh and blood churned and combined at a speed visible to the naked eye. The scene was extremely disgusting and terrifying. The first abyssal worm was born. It crawled out of the pool of blood and then frantically pounced on another abyssal worm that was born next to it. This was the power of the law of the abyss. After the birth of any blood pool, the first thing to do was to give birth to a new mother worm. Sauron accelerated this process. Under the effect of a large number of soul crystals, thousands of abyssal worms were quickly born. Then they crazily devoured and evolved under the eyes of the demons. A trace of power was extracted by the pool of blood. Just as Sauron created this huge pool of blood, the resurrection spells of the high-grade undead on the battlefield in the distance were weakened a lot. The number of undead that they could resurrect was greatly reduced. And the souls wandering in Thanatos were drawn to the abyss blood pool in the distance by some force. Chapter 1059. Countless skeletons were buried beneath Thanatos. Ever since the Lord of the Abyss, Orcus, took control of this plane, Thanatos had been transforming it. Could be traced back to 3,000 years ago. At that time, the earliest Orcus had not died and was resurrected. In order to transform this plane into a negative energy, he resurrected a large number of undead and transformed many undead creatures. After that, Orcus started a war with the will of the Abyss itself. The source of power in the Abyss was demons. In this world that lasted for 3,000 years, Thanatos on the 113th floor of the Abyss kept transforming demons with souls. Then he was killed by the undead here. Countless demon skeletons were piled up underground. Creatures from other planes also died here. Death gave birth to the undead. Under Orcus's intentional control, he was like a devil that completed the transformation of a certain plane in the Abyss. With the accumulation of a large number of skeletons and the power of death, this plane was gradually added with negative energy. It was just like the spiritual world. But the real power did not lie here. Orcus spent so much energy not only to transform the plane, but also to seek the divine power of death. His power also came from this plane. Or rather, it was the core of the place, the city of the dead, Naratel. There was a gigantic magic formation there, constantly gathering the power of death. Orcus had been drawing from it for a long time to gain enough power to contend with the gods. From an abyss worm to the most powerful demon lord. This did not only require talent and luck. Orcus was obviously hiding something in the depths of the city of the dead. In the wilderness, the army of millions of undead had been destroyed by Sauron's demon army. These low-level undead could not stop Sauron, and he did not care about these things. This was just the beginning. Sauron's goal of transforming Thanatos was not only to erase the negative energy here, but also to prepare to attack the final destination of this area. The legendary city of the dead, Naratel. There were some places in the abyss that were very difficult to break through. For example, the Endless Labyrinth, the 45th to 47th floor of the Silver City, and the City of the Dead ruled by Orcus. Silver City was Six Fingers territory. This was the territory that ran through the 45th to 47th level of the abyss. Now this territory was divided into two halves. After the Dark Monarch died due to the revenge of the Goddess of Wealth, these three levels were inherited by his former adjutant, Weiss. The Dark Monarch had a large number of children, but these demon children didn't have a large territory. Some of them were controlled by an evil and powerful witch. This witch had once summoned and enslaved the Dark King. Later, due to the Dark King's vengeance, she had entered the bottomless abyss. For now, the three layers of the bottomless abyss were divided between them. Even after the death of the Dark Monarch, there were still a large number of Balers stationed near the city. This was a place that even the Succubus Queen and the Spider Queen Lolth had a hard time conquering at their peak. The same point. As the core territory controlled by Orcus, Even Sauron might not be able to take down the city of the dead, Naratel, with its huge demon army. The characteristics of Thanatos Plain were loosening. Countless wandering souls were attracted by the blood pool of the abyss and turned into worms. This time, the chaotic consciousness of the bottomless abyss was undoubtedly on Sauron's side. It relied on instinct to extract these souls, and at the same time, balanced the number of demons and undead in this plane. It quickly turned a large number of wandering souls into abyssal worms, and then quickly produced the first batch of demons. This batch of demons hatched very quickly. There was a cavity in the demon's body. This cavity contained the genes of many forms of demons, including Dretch, Quasits, Glabrizu, fire demons, Vrok, Baylor, and so on. Different wills and souls would extract different powers. The Tana-Re demons were a species born from the desires of humans. Batches of berserk demons appeared one after another. These demons directly devoured the souls, tore their original bodies, and were born from the broken shells. The angry consciousness of the bottomless abyss affected the transformation of these demons. The number of other types of demons was less than 20%, while the number of berserk demons was as high as 80%. Anger. After being distorted for so long, the bottomless abyss feedback to this level was anger. Kneel. Sauron's figure rose into the air, and endless flames appeared around his body. He roared at the thousands of berserk demons that were born in front of him, "You lowly worms! I am the Baylor Lord, Sauron. From today on I am your master. Now, go to battle. Go to kill. Destroy the undead here. It is they who have imprisoned your souls for countless years." Brr. A series of roars could be heard. The newborn demons did not have much wisdom, but driven by anger and will, they were controlled by Sauron and then sent to the battlefield with the undead. The entire plain had become a meat grinder. An army of more than 100,000 demons was densely spread out within a radius of 100 kilometers. More than 10 times the number of undead gathered from all directions to resist the demons' attack. Countless tombs opened and skeletal warriors crawled out. A large number of wandering liches and skeletal knights gathered and charged towards Sauron's demon army. This was an extremely tragic war of attrition. But Sauron could bear this kind of consumption because as long as the abyss blood pool was still there, his forces would continue to recover. More and more souls would become demons, and the number of undead that could be resurrected would gradually decrease. Master. Just as Sauron was waiting for the result of the first battle, a slender succubus maid came out of the fog. This was a demon favored by the Lord of Shadows. She had successfully promoted to an assassin and obtained some of the abilities of a professional. Because of the innate demon level, her strength had greatly increased after being promoted to an assassin. Although she was still in the form of a succubus, she had reached the legendary level, and her body size had become smaller because of her profession. I have found the passage to the city of the dead, Naratel. The succubus assassin knelt on one knee. She handed a marker stone to Sauron and said, "There are many powerful undead wandering there. I even saw a lich and a vampire giant near an obelisk. A terrible power of death shrouds that place." Sauron's figure landed. He stretched out his hand and took the marker stone. A smile appeared on his face and then he waved his hand and said, "Got it. Let the Hezru enter the battlefield. Crush these undead. They're just a bunch of appetizers." As Sauron's voice trailed off, tens of thousands of Hezru who were 8 feet tall and nearly 1,000 pounds in weight, possessing astonishing strength and physique, and could use blasphemy whisper 3 times a day joined the battlefield. They were the main cannon fodder of the demon army, and also the backbone of the frontal assault on the demon army. Hundreds of demon-hunting spiders advanced from the back of the portal. These were the monsters that Sauron had tamed. 3 teams of 6-armed snake demons advanced from the flanks. Although there were only a few dozen of these 6-armed snake demons, the effect of a real battle was equivalent to thousands of soldiers and horses. Any 6-armed snake demon could easily destroy thousands of undead troops. The real battle had begun. Sauron finally confirmed the coordinates of the city of the dead and sent out his main army. P.S. Recently I just want to read and not write. I read a lot of books and information and finally found the feeling of writing. Do you think Buddha's situation will be better after a beating? Mwah. I love you. Chapter 1060. 6-armed Marillion were true killing machines. These terrifying creatures were 20 feet long and weighed around 4,000 pounds. They had around 30 points of strength and dexterity, as well as abilities such as defense, battle reflex, multi-attack, multi-weapon combat, violent attack, and so on. Unlike Soren's dual-wielding, six-armed Marillion could use up to 6 weapons at once. They also had spells such as Blade Barrier, Shadow Projection, Polymorph, Evil Aura, and so on. In this world, Aura was equivalent to a halo effect. It was a special ability that covered a certain area, and was very effective in battle. When the 6-armed snake demons under Sauron's command stepped into the battlefield, they saw the undead in front of them being cut down in batches like wheat being harvested. In a large-scale battle in the Abyss, only the flame fiends with their AoE body of flames could compare to the 6-armed Marillion. However, many creatures had fire resistance, so the 6-armed Marillion's damage was higher than the flame fiends. Succubus and Vrock followed behind the 6-armed Marillion. Their mission wasn't to fight, but to collect the soul crystals dropped by the undead. The power of laws in this plane had been disrupted, which led to a higher probability of dropping soul crystals. The soul flames in the pupils of many undead immediately extinguished after death, and then quickly formed into fingernail-sized gray crystals. These were all soul crystals of lower quality. After the succubus maid sent the collected soul crystals to the abyssal blood pool, every time a batch of soul crystals was thrown in, the water in the blood pool would churn on a large scale. Then, countless flesh and blood would combine to form abyssal worms. These abyssal worms would kill each other and become new demons. The entire battle lasted for almost a day. Sauron's demons were swapped out in 3 batches, and the number of undead in front of them was greatly reduced. There were only around 200,000 of them left. The demon army had lost around 30 to 50,000. However, most of the low-ranked demons died, while the high-ranked ones had very few casualties. This was because most of the high-ranked demons could teleport and fly. More importantly, such a large-scale battle was clearly in accordance with the power of laws of the Abyss. Some of the demons automatically absorbed the soul power of the enemies when they died, and a new batch of middle-grade and high-grade demons was rapidly born in the slaughter. Now that the remaining undead were relatively powerful, Sauron did not intend to continue wasting cannon fodder. Let's get rid of these enemies. Sauron finally stepped onto the battlefield, and behind him was a group of flame imps. Raging Flame Body was activated. With Sauron as the center, the area within a radius of more than 100 meters turned into a sea of fire. The terrifyingly high temperature melted everything, and even the soil turned into glass. Behind him were batches of flame demons and fire demons. These demons activated their flaming bodies at the same time, instantly turning the area within a few kilometers into a mountain of fire. Even the other demons did not dare to approach. Sauron's flame whip, which was more than 50 meters long, swung down from the sky. Sauron finished off a Death Knight in one move. The rest of the battle was completely one-sided. The flame demons were at least legendary and most of the fire demons were high-grade. Now, within the range of Sauron's flaming body, any enemy that was not immune to fire damage would receive about 30 points of fire damage per second. With the average vitality of the undead being more than 100, they would be burned to ashes in 5 seconds at most. In other words, Sauron could kill millions of undead by himself, but the efficiency was very slow. The effect of the Balor demon on other enemies was suppressive. Only those who could stand within the range of Sauron's flaming body for more than 10 seconds were qualified to fight with him, and those who could reach this point in the lower planes were legendary. Enemies below legendary might not even be able to walk up to Sauron alive. Facing a powerful demon lord, the Death Knights finally could not resist. They gave up on the skeletal fortress, and some retreated to the direction of Later, while the others completely abandoned the plain. The abyss was so big and with their strength they could survive anywhere. Many high-grade undead did not want to stay and die. Finally, after spending half a day to clean up the battlefield, Sauron's demon army opened up a path to Later. Later was the real territory of the undead King Orcus, and also one of the most dangerous places in the abyss. From here there was a direct path to Later. It was the real kingdom of the dead and there were almost no traces of demons. Although it was in the abyss, it was completely occupied by the undead. Later, known as the City of the Dead, was a cold country carved on the surface of the frozen sea. The cold buildings of Later were a frozen cemetery, and there were tall mausoleums scattered everywhere. These mausoleums looked like the tombs of a human country. Some places were even paved with carpets made from the hair of the thousands of undead who could not rest in peace in Later. The army guarding this land included demon-hunting spiders, vampire giants, various high-grade undead creatures, and most of the liches. Most of the ordinary soldiers were zombies, ghouls, corpse demons, Boda corpses, and other zombies that followed the darkness. Who ruled Later seemed to be a problem. In an unknown era, a powerful demon lord by the name of Orcus claimed to own the entire plain. However, after Orcus was declared dead, a drow god of vengeance and immortality claimed to own the spoils of war as the victor and the corresponding jurisdiction of the plain, as well as the jewel on the crown of the plain, Later. However, there were convincing clues that Orcus was not dead as many people thought. He seemed to have rarely died and was resurrected once. Later, the drow god suddenly disappeared, and no one knew if she escaped or was killed. Later. This was a land that even the evil gods coveted. When Sauron's demon army arrived at this place through the portal, they immediately saw many iconic buildings of Later. The huge and magnificent mausoleums, some of which covered an area of dozens of acres, had many underground passages. In the distance, there were tall obelisks that reached into the clouds. In Later, this was a symbol because there were dozens of obelisks that reached into the clouds, and the tallest one was close to 300 meters. Legend said that this was something left behind from ancient times, and some said that it was a huge magic circle that Orcus spent thousands of years to set up. Chapter 1061. This was the real kingdom of death. There was a negative energy aura here that was close to the underworld. When Sauron's demon army arrived, a black mass of zombies, ghouls, zombies, Boda corpses, and carrion immediately gathered in front of them. There were so many of them that it was as if there was no end to them. However, these were not the real problem. The high-tier undead that had been left behind by some force to guard Naratel had appeared. Giant demon-hunting spiders crawled out of the mausoleum, vampiric giants walked out from the city walls, some liches appeared near the obelisk, and many ancient vampires crawled out from the deepest part of the tomb. These were the real guards of Orcus. They were bound here just like the Balers hovering near the Silver Palace. The demon lord used a special method to make them guard his territory. It looks like a tough battle. Sauron stepped forward. Behind him, a huge demon army had gathered. The number of enemies was still very large, and the increasing number of high-grade undead meant that they would have to pay a high price to occupy this place. Prepare the portal. Sauron looked up at the sky and said, "Set up a cross-plane teleportation circle." There were too many enemies. With so many enemies, even if Sauron won, his demon army would be wiped out. In this case, he could only rely on the power of Mordor City. The enemies were very dense. Although there were many of them, they were gathered near the mausoleum. This was a good thing because Sauron had thought of a good way to deal with them. This could weaken the enemy's power to the greatest extent. A ray of light appeared on the obelisk in the distance. It seemed that some kind of magic circle had been activated. The place was shrouded in an unusually strong negative energy. Fortunately, Orcus did not master the power of the lock, because Sauron felt that there might be something similar to a lock in the center of the huge magic circle here. It was as if the towers of the northern witches had been combined to form a massive maze. There was also a huge defensive circle here. Unfortunately, because Orcus was dead, the liches did not activate their ability. Mordor City. In the arcane tower, Sorin's low voice sounded, "Activate the teleportation device. Lock onto the spatial waymark. Activate the elemental furnace. Activate Mies's nucleus." A series of orders were given. With Thaling's help, the steel golems quickly got to work, activating the energy switches and activating the charging system of the arcane tower. Super Magic Pulse Cannon charged and activated. The entire arcane tower trembled. Then a ray of light appeared at the top of the arcane tower. The superconducting Mana Pulse Cannon quickly lit up. A huge amount of energy gathered, and then a portal opened on its firing path. Activate the interdimensional energy strike system. Activate the interdimensional tactical strike device. Activate bombing mode. Cut off the lock function. Energy transfer to the super arcane crystal pulse cannon. Fire. Thaling took over the firing control authority, and at the same time, used his own sophisticated computing device to lock the coordinates of the interdimensional space strike. As a ray of light flashed across the sky, a huge energy impact directly passed through the portal in midair, and then fell from the sky somewhere in the bottomless abyss. Then there was a loud rumbling sound, and the terrible energy explosion directly flattened about 3 kilometers in the center. Not only did it clear the enemies in the attack range, but at the same time, the horrifying high temperature also directly crystallized the ground. Even the gods in the form of saints could not resist the energy attack of the pulse cannon. The explosive power of the pulse cannon was more terrifying than the ship cannons in the interstellar era. This terrifying energy attack was destructive. It could even directly vaporize steel in the center, let alone the bodies of the undead. Boom, boom. Under the control of Thaling, the pulse cannon fired continuously, and it fired more than 10 times in a row before it stopped. At this moment, in the depths of the bottomless abyss, a vacuum area had formed in front of the Baelor Lord Sauron. An area of about 60 square kilometers in front of him had been destroyed, including more than 10 tombs. Even many ancient vampires could not escape with their vaporization ability and were directly vaporized. Mortals could not resist this terrible lethality at all. Even the gods could only resist it by activating their divine shield. Ordinary energy shields would shatter in an instant. Full attack. After the arcane tower of Mordor carried out a blanket interdimensional tactical strike, Sauron waved his hand and ordered the demon army under him to launch a general attack. Countless demons howled and rushed to the obelisk in front of them. In order to avoid destroying these obelisks, Sauron only bombed the ancient tombs. Because if the obelisks were destroyed, even if he won in the end, he would only get ruins. A dense number of vampire giants appeared. These were all flesh and blood creations of Orcus, a terrible undead monster. A large number of liches appeared in front of them. Some liches began to prepare their spells, while the Baelor's silhouette rose into the air and rushed towards the enemy's rear. The assassin demons also quietly approached. Only legendary demons who had mastered advanced teleportation spells could resist these evil liches, and only they could quickly cut into the enemy's rear and interrupt the liches' spell casting. The huge Hezru army began to advance. In the face of a large number of vampire giants, the number of casualties of the Hezru increased rapidly, and it almost became a bloody battlefield in the abyss. Sauron's demon army was quickly consumed. This was an unprecedentedly fierce battle. Even the middle and high-grade demons had almost no guarantee. They were fighting against the Devil's army, and every inch of land they occupied needed to be covered with demon blood. The six-armed Merithians rushed forward like sharp knives. But this time they suffered casualties. In the case of slaughtering so many undead, the six-armed Merithians almost didn't suffer any casualties. But now, in just the first wave of attack, several six-armed Merithians were killed by the vampire giants. A large number of Baelors descended from the sky. These legendary demons brandished flame whips and stepped into the battlefield. They tore a crack, but at the same time, some Baelors also perished under the siege of the ancient vampires. Every inch of land was in a battle. Sauron's demon army had just occupied the place, and they were immediately counterattacked by the high-grade undead. They were guarding this place. This was their mission. Anyone who attacked would be attacked by them. Chapter 1062. This was an extremely difficult battle. The high-grade demons under Sauron's command even felt that they were fighting against an elite army of demons. The current situation made them almost think that they were on the battlefield of the abyss. But even so, the demons did not retreat at all because madness, greed and bloodthirst had swallowed them up. All the demons knew what it meant if they occupied this place. It meant that the Baelor Lord Sauron would become the new powerful demon lord of the abyss, and might even replace him as the giant of the abyss. In this way, the status of these high-grade demons would rise steadily. In the case of occupying multiple levels of the abyss, the most common thing for demon lords was to infect the secondary demon lords, which was a once-in-a-century opportunity for most demons. This was the pattern of the abyss. The birth of any secondary demon lord was through stepping on a pile of bones, and in the case of masters in many levels, there were very few secondary demon lords that could be born. The demons fell one by one. One by one, the undead were torn apart. The whole battle lasted for a whole day, and when the undead in front of them finally became thin, Sauron also took out his last trump card. Army of Einherjars. A group of demon believers who served the Lord of Shadows gathered. In the abyss, many demons would follow and believe in evil gods. Whether it was the Queen of Spiders or the Goddess of Misfortune, they had many demon believers. These demon believers were different from ordinary demons. They were bound by certain restrictions and would automatically deviate to the realm of believing in gods. A huge altar had been completed. The demon believers were mainly Succubus, Cunning, and Glabrizu. They held a grand blood sacrifice ceremony, and then a dark red light gate opened at the back of the battlefield. Teams of demon hunters appeared from the portal. Since Sauron took control of the Kingdom of God, the demon hunters had moved into the interior of the Kingdom of God, and now there were 5,000 or 6,000 of them. Behind the demon hunters was the army of Einherjars. Many soldiers died in the city of Mordor in the main material plane. The souls of these people were reborn in the Kingdom of God and became a new batch of Einherjars. Then, a group of otherworldly god servants appeared. These otherworldly god envoys with grey wings soared into the air and led the army of heroic spirits to launch the final wave of attacks against the undead. The majestic army of heroic spirits began to advance. Their combat power was stronger than the demons. Although their individual strength was similar to that of the demons, these heroic spirits used to be the army of Motor City. Although they were dead, they retained a part of their memories and combat skills. These heroic spirits were like an elite demonic army. They advanced steadily and cooperated well. They had something that demons did not have. And that was discipline. The lethality of tens of thousands of heroic spirits in the battle was comparable to that of hundreds of thousands of demons. They were like reapers, tearing apart and destroying the undead in front of them in batches. Although there were still casualties, the ratio was much less than that of the demon army. Some of the chaotic and crazy demons had already rushed to the rear of the enemy. When these high-grade demons came back, they formed an encirclement with the army of heroic spirits. The otherworldly god envoys had more combat power than the Balers. Their grey wings escaped into the shadows and constantly killed the liches and ancient vampires in sight. These otherworldly god envoys were all given divine power by Soren. They were at least high-grade legends. A few of them had reached the level of demigod after experiencing the battle in the Kingdom of Fear. These otherworldly god servants were very powerful. The only disadvantage was that they could not leave the Kingdom of God for too long. Every time they left the Kingdom of God, they would need to consume the accumulated divine power in the Kingdom of God. The Balers also stepped on the battlefield. Sauron waved a flame whip that was 50 or 60 meters long, and with a giant beheading sword in his other hand, he rushed into the interior of the undead. An ancient vampire was slain by him, and then another high-level lich entered his field of vision. There was no technique to speak of in the battle. The enemy was an undead that had no fear or pain. The final battle was a bloody war of attrition. Until night fell. Sauron could see that all the undead had fallen, and there were corpses of demons everywhere. His army had also paid a heavy price. Roar! Excited cheers sounded. After most of the undead had been killed, the high-grade demons under Sauron's command roared fanatically. Sauron opened his huge demonic wings, and his figure rose into the air. He roared, "We won. From today on this place belongs to us. From Thanatos to Naratel, it's all our territory." Brr. Roars of fanaticism sounded from all directions. Even the stupidest demon knew that they had won. A huge territory. They had occupied a level. After paying a huge price, they finally took down the 113th floor of the abyss. Master. The tall figure of the succubus owner appeared behind Sauron. Her leather armor was stained with blood. It seemed that she had also joined the battle. She knelt down on one knee in front of Sauron and said, "About 50% of the demon army has died. But we have obtained a huge number of soul stones. We should be able to recover soon." The goblin demon warlocks found countless rare materials in Naratel's warehouse. At the same time, there are about 100 legendary soul stones. We have controlled some of the lich's phylacteries. They are now sealed around the portal. Master, you should deal with them first. The liches were not so easy to kill. If it was not killed by divine power, the liches would be resurrected. But fortunately, the liches of Naratel were bound here, so their phylacteries were also kept in the deepest part of the castle. I know. Sauron nodded. Nearly half of his demon army had died in this battle. More than 100,000 demons had fallen in the hands of the undead. But the harvest was also huge. Not only could the soul stones be used to create more demons, but it could also allow a large number of demons to level up. To Sauron, no matter how tragic the battle was, as long as they won, it meant that more demons would appear. This was a process of reducing the demon army. Battles and massacres allowed the demons to level up quickly. Nearly half of the demon army had died, which meant that after the battle, there would be tens of thousands of demons that would enter the realm of middle and advanced. These demons would become the main force of the demon army. Almost half of the demons under Soren's command had advanced through battles and were not recruited from other places. These demons were more loyal and obedient. Clean up the battlefield. Sauron's figure rose into the air. He was ready to take a look at the lich's phylacteries and the legendary soul stones. Chapter 1063. In the depths of Nalatel. Sauron saw a pile of strange lich phylacteries. The most obvious feature was that they looked almost the same. There was no doubt about it. These liches were all man-made, and the purpose of their existence was to protect Nalatel. Sauron picked up a dark golden lich phylactery and immediately felt a control circle. Orcus created these liches and controlled their souls. As long as he controlled the phylactery, he could control these liches. However, the price of doing so was that these liches lost the ability to evolve. They were not liches transformed from legendary mages. After their phylacteries were controlled, it was impossible for them to evolve into demigod liches. They had been guarding Nalatel for a long time, so their strength and potential had been limited. On the other side was a whole box of legendary soul crystals. Nalatel was the territory of the undead. The most common thing here was soul crystals. The undead were the creatures that dropped the most natural soul crystals. Looks like a good harvest. On the other side of the treasury there were a lot of materials. The undead did not care about gold or silver, so most of the materials here were gems and rare minerals. In the long years of running Nalatel, the undead had thoroughly explored this plane and found a lot of valuable minerals. Sauron saw a lot of mithril, adamantine, thorium, astral stones, arcanite ingots and so on. These were all materials made by the liches. Some rare materials from the astral world could be found at the edge of the abyss. In the center of Nalatel was a huge fortress, and there was a huge control circle inside the fortress. Sure enough, Sauron stepped on the circle in front of him and immediately felt that the obelisks in all directions were under his control. They had a special function because these obelisks could gather the power of death. Orcus really wants to get his hands on the godhood of death. The power of the obelisks gathered the power of death. This was the key to Orcus becoming the king of undead. What a pity. Sauron quickly walked down and shook his head. Just with the power of death, without a godhood and believers, it is impossible to compete with the real god of death. But this gave Orcus the characteristic of being undead. The number of spoils was huge. Some of them would stay in the bottomless abyss, while the other would be sent to Motor City. As for the most critical batch of legendary soul crystals, Sauron only kept about 1/5 of them, and sent the rest to Motor City. After Motor City developed a diamond planet, most of the conditions for building a diamond golem had been met. The only thing missing was high-level soul crystals. These legendary soul crystals were enough to create a large number of top-tier diamond golems. They could even be used to create advanced versions of the diamond golems, which were the legendary constructs that protected the arcane towers. They were a weakened version of Thaling. They did not have the supportability of Thaling, and most of their functions were used for fighting and killing. The Devil Legion had suffered heavy casualties. With such a large number of casualties, Sauron had no choice but to postpone his plan to attack Ghoul King Dor-Isen. Instead, he began infecting some lesser demon lords. The territory he controlled now was already very large. The huge territory from Thanatos to Later was enough for Sauron to infect more than a dozen lesser demon lords, but he did not do so. Instead, he selected 7 demon lords and promoted them to lesser demon lords. Each level of the bottomless abyss was big and small. The 113th level of Thanatos was relatively medium-sized, and it was enough for Sauron to infect a group of lesser demon lords. However, while Thanatos could be given away, Later definitely couldn't. There were still many secrets in this place. Furthermore, the death energy here was abnormally dense. Orcus had practically turned this place into half a divine kingdom. The secrets of these obelisks must not be known by other demons. Sauron was ready to control this place himself, and at the same time, study how Orcus obtained the power of death. Orcus had many powers that only the god of death had, such as the Hand of Death, the resurrection of the undead, and so on. At the same time, the staff of Orcus could directly turn the target it killed into the undead. This power was not easy even for the god of death. On the other side, in the distant city of Moder, just after Sauron broke through the last fortress of Later, Sorin opened his eyes in an instant. A golden ray of light shot out from his eyes. Finally, it's time. Sorin's figure stood up, and the light of divine power gathered all over his body. He looked like a golden armored giant. He stretched out his hand toward the sky, and all the temples on the island of Moder suddenly rang loudly. Then countless power of faith converged toward the great temple, and a majestic divine power was mobilized and condensed by him. Divine molding. Change form. Sorin was holding the staff of Orcus in his hand. During this time, he had been staying in the temple to crack the secrets of this artifact. When Later was broken, some kind of blessing on the artifact was broken in an instant. Shrill screams were heard. Just after Sorin broke the protection of the staff of Orcus, the screams of countless souls suddenly sounded. This was an extremely evil divine artifact. Just like the famous Frostmourne, the essence of the staff of Orcus was to turn any dead creature into the undead, and at the same time, imprison the souls of many mortals. Over the long years, the divine artifact had imprisoned too many souls. The evil power it possessed was not much weaker than that of Orcus himself, because every time Orcus was resurrected, he would have to obtain the divine artifact to truly come back to life. Countless souls turned into ferocious wraiths and rushed toward Soren. This was the backlash of the artifact, and it was also Orcus' last resistance. If a mortal faced such an attack, they would almost certainly die. If someone accidentally destroyed the artifact with Mage's disjunction, they would almost immediately die under the backlash. However, Soren was a true god after all, and a true god close to the great divine power. In the face of the black fog formed by countless wraiths, he just raised his hand in the sky, and then a light gate appeared in front of him. Ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Soren stretched out his hand toward the void, and immediately tens of thousands of wraiths were caught by him. Then he waved his hand toward the light gate in front of him, and a huge suction force burst out. Screams of horror were heard. Countless wraiths were forcibly sucked into the light gate, sent into Soren's kingdom, and then thrown into the pool of reincarnation. Finally, cracks appeared on the staff of Orcus, and a human soul that looked a little fat appeared in front of Soren. This was the original body of Orcus, and also his appearance when he was immortal. Chapter 1064. No. The human soul that looked a little fat in front of him roared unwillingly, but Soren's expression did not change at all. He did not hesitate to reach out and grab the soul in front of him, then crushed him directly. A huge amount of soul energy exploded. Orcus's power turned into countless divine lights and poured into Soren's body. A row of data appeared in front of him. You have killed the undead king Orcus, soul form. Extracting the target's soul energy. You have gained 150,000 slaughter EXP. Extracting the target's divine power. You have gained 10 divinity points. Extracting the target's divine power. You have gained 5 divine power. Devour the target's divine power. You have gained the undead trait. Your death domain has been upgraded. You have gained the additional ability, Undead Summon. You have gained the additional ability, Undead Summon. A wave of death energy blended into Soren's body. Orcus's weak soul was crushed without hesitation. At the same time, along with Orcus's complete death, a special undead trait was also absorbed by Soren. Undead trait. Your soul has seen through the mystery of death, which allows you to escape death. This is a power that only gods can have. When your physical body dies, your soul can use external objects to revive you. The undead trait makes your soul stronger. It seems that only the real Grim Reaper can kill you. The source of Orcus's revival. Soren seemed to have felt something, and then a smile appeared on his face. It seems that Orcus is a little unfortunate. After gaining the undead trait, Soren finally understood why Orcus kept reviving. It was because of this ability to see through the mystery of death that many people could not completely kill Orcus after killing him. However, Soren was different from others. He had inherited the power of the 3 gods of death, and this was what Orcus was most afraid of. Only the Grim Reaper could really kill him. Soren's power happened to meet this requirement. Otherwise, the other gods could only imprison and seal Orcus's soul, just like what others did in the past. This trait doesn't seem to be useful to me. Soren frowned and muttered, the form of a true god can be revived. As long as it's not during the Avatar Crisis or in the Abyss Blood War, the possibility of a god being revived is very high. Furthermore, the Grim Reaper can eliminate the undead trait and kill the target. For now. There are quite a lot of gods with the clergy of death active in the material plane. This was a trait was basically useless. Unless Soren killed all the gods with the clergy of death, this trait was completely useless. Fortunately, after killing Orcus, Soren's domain of death was upgraded again, and at the same time the domain of undead was extended. This special extension allowed Soren to obtain the power of Undead Summon and Undead Summon, and at the same time, it also allowed his priests to access the domain of Undead Summon. In other words, from now on, the priests in Soren's church could use necromancy spells. For example, the divine spells that could awaken skeletons, control undead creatures and summon undead in groups. These were not divine spells that could be used before, but now, because of Soren's upgrade, his priests could have 2 types of summoning abilities at the same time. One was to summon shadow creatures, and the other was to summon undead creatures. A little bit of golden light spread out from the temple. When Soren sat on the throne again, all the priests in the material plane who believed in and served Soren felt something, and then they found that there were some additional spells in the divine spells that they could use. These spells were fed back to the priests through the perception of the gods, and they had to reach a certain level of strength to access the domain of undead summon. Waves of prayers were heard. Countless priests began to pray and praise the greatness of Soren, because they had no doubt that the god they served just now had become even more powerful. Of course, the real power of this domain was not here. However, Soren was a little doubtful about whether he should activate this ability. After he killed Orcus, it seemed that the domain of believers had expanded to include undead creatures. Soren seemed to be able to receive the faith of the undead. This was an ability that only the true god of death had. Whether it was Naruto or Clemvox, they had a lot of believers of the undead. At the same time, among the special abilities that Soren could give to his believers, there was also a special power that could be gained after a deep access to the domain of the undead, and that was half-undead transformation, and undead transformation. At present, Soren could only activate the special bloodline to transform shadow creatures. His believers could transform into shadow creatures through some kind of ritual, giving up some of their human characteristics and gaining the ability of shadow creatures. At the same time, their lifespan would be greatly increased. The transformation into undead was even more thorough, directly turning them into undead creatures. In theory, their lifespan would be extremely long, but they would have the weakness of undead creatures. Forget it. Soren thought about it carefully and shook his head. Let's not activate the ability to transform into undead for now. After all, the undead were not living people. This was not necessarily a good thing for Soren's church, and he had not fully mastered the domain of death yet. If he activated this domain, the church would become even more complicated. In a situation where there were already shadow creatures, it was not a good thing for Soren to join an undead church. Moreover, Soren's kingdom needed to be filled up. If many of his believers turned into undead when they were about to die, where would the souls in the kingdom come from? On one point, Soren agreed with Clemvox's teachings. That was, the undead should not disturb the world of the living too much. This would make the boundary between life and death blur. What Soren needed more were the petitioners in his kingdom, not a bunch of undead. Even though the petitioners were reincarnated after death and lost many of their memories, they still had their emotions and thoughts. However, the undead were completely different. In the long run, the undead were more harmful than beneficial to Soren's church. Chapter 1065. I only need 15 more divinity points to become a great divine power. For Soren, the greatest joy he got from killing Orcus was not the undead's ability, but the fact that he was one step closer to becoming a great divine power. Currently, Soren's divinity points were 505, which was more than most intermediate gods. Even if he was compared to a great divine power, he would not be too far behind. Moreover, Soren's demon avatar still had some divinity points. Although it was not a lot, it would not be a problem for him to accumulate about 550 divinity points. After all, there were many demons in the abyss who had a trace of divinity. Then there was Soren's divinity points. After a long period of accumulation, his divinity points had reached 285. This meant that as long as Soren killed an enemy of low to medium divine power, he could directly advance to the level of great divine power. Who else? Soren searched deep in his memory for a god that was most likely to be killed and least likely to offend. For now, the undead calamity had reached its final stage. This stage was a period of rebellion, which meant that many undead had lost control and started to go berserk. The reason for this was that Naruto had given up on controlling these undead and was preparing to absorb the power of death to become a great divine power. Clemvox's eternal rest domain had been shattered. This last wave of the undead calamity could be divided into 3 parts, which were the 3 epic quests that the adventurers participated in. The first part was related to the Red Robe Wizards. The Red Robe Wizard's chief necromancer, Sarzastan, was a powerful demigod lich. He led many of the remaining Red Robe Wizards to attack the Tori region. Because the Red Robe Wizards were almost destroyed, the remaining wizards were necromancers and liches. Therefore, this part of the battle affected the entire Tori region. The gods involved included the Lady of Silver Moon, the goddess of aristocracy, the god of craftsmanship, and the god of suffering. The churches of these gods secretly intervened to stop the Red Robe Wizards, and the high-grade adventurers also accepted this epic quest. In the end, Sarzastan died and the Red Robe Wizards returned to the world of undead. But now it was hard to say. It mainly depended on whether the other gods would personally take action. After all, there were not that many adventurers now. The second part of the quest was about the retaliation of the dragon cultists and the dragon witchcraft sect. Soren had already dealt a heavy blow to this part of the quest. Moreover, there were already dragons from the good faction attacking the members of the dragon witchcraft sect. Therefore, this part of the epic level quest should be the least difficult. With other giant dragons involved, the dragon witch cult would not be able to do much. Besides, Naruto did not have the time to help them. The third part was the key. This was the top epic mission since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. Back then, those who were qualified to join this epic quest were basically adventurers of the legendary to demigod level. Now, the natives who were qualified to participate had to be at least demigod level. This part of the epic quest was divided into 3 camps. Naruto, Clemvox, the king of the dead, Sirik, the god of murder, and the goddess of death and magic from another world. However, the latter was only here to fish in troubled waters and would not really risk her life for the priesthood. Therefore, the third part was the decisive key. Adventurers could choose to intervene in one of the 3 factions. There were other gods behind the 3 factions, and according to the original progress, the final winner should be the god of death. However, Soren had also inherited the power of the 3 gods of death. That was to say, if Soren wanted to, he was also qualified to intervene in this battle. The god of death, Nero, was currently the most powerful one. After preparing for the undead calamity for a long time, Nero ambushed Kalemver and severely injured him. Then Nero broke the eternal slumber domain and triggered the calamity. With a large number of undead being resurrected and the living dying, the power of death in the material plane had gathered to a critical point. This power could directly promote a god who mastered the priesthood of death to a great divine power. Naruto was preparing for the last step. When the whole sacrificial ceremony reached its peak, he would appear to absorb this power and directly replace Clemvox as the master of death. In this case, Clemvox would not sit still and wait for death. Therefore, when Naruto was ready to be promoted to a great divine power, Clemvox would definitely appear to stop him. At the same time, Rick, who also hated Clemvox and held the priesthood of murder, would also make a move. Soren was now faced with a choice. Which part of the last 3 parts of the disaster of the undead? If it was the first part, it would be very easy for him to solve, and the rewards would also be less. The second part was even less valuable. After all, the god of Lich had fallen and there were other dragons involved. The defeat of the dragon witch cult was only a matter of time. However, the third part of the story was too mixed up with good and bad people. According to Soren's understanding, the other gods who were secretly watching all of this were the Lady of Night, the Lady of Silver Moon, the Goddess of Magic, the God of Light, the Queen of Spiders, the God of War, the Goddess of Doom, and so on. Everyone had some ideas about this, but there were not many who were willing to fight for their lives. This was not a trivial matter because it was related to the structure of the lower planes of the multiverse. In particular, the final winner would gain the right to rule the underworld. This was the most important point. Clemvox and the Goddess of Magic used to be lovers, and he was considered the kindest of the gods of death. At the same time, he had a good relationship with the Lady of Silver Moon. However, because of his teachings, Clemvox was very hostile in the eyes of the undead and evil creatures. The realm of eternal rest made many of the undead turn their backs on him. Originally, the believers of Mirko defected to the world of souls because of his teachings and the realm of eternal rest. Soren pondered and murmured, Sirik has many enemies and now he has almost no allies. Apart from his own cunning, he is the weakest one. Naruto is the real enemy. Not only does he control most of the underworld, but he also has the support of many undead kings, and the strength of his own church is very strong. But he also has a weakness, that is, his teachings are more extreme and he is a god from another world. Even if he has been here for thousands of years, it does not change his nature as a god from another world. If I really want to fight for the priesthood of death, then personal strength is not the most important point. The ownership of the underworld determines the structure of the multiverse. The believers of the gods have to be transported through the river Styx. In the end, many gods with great divine power may intervene in the outcome of the priesthood of death. In this case, if I really want to fight for the position of the god of death, then lobbying the other gods is imperative. The interests involved in death were too great. After all, Soren's foundation was still a little shallow. If he wanted to join this competition, he must first try to lobby the other gods. Chapter 1066. The new year was coming to an end. It was getting closer and closer to Naruto's final promotion ceremony. Mordor City began to rebuild after the war. Because of the demon attack, a large number of civilians died, which forced the city hall to relocate the population again. Fortunately, Soren's initial layout had been completed. The council of the city hall had taken over most of the secular management power, and Gloria was at the helm, so some trivial things did not need Soren to deal with. At present, the secular power class of Mordor City had been born. They were performing their duties honestly under the pressure of the gods, but how long they could last would take time to test. After handing over many things to others and telling the fallen which to try to master the power of the goddess of pestilence, Soren began his very important journey. The Frost Kingdom Arendelle. This was Soren's first destination. Compared to other gods, Princess Royal had the closest relationship with him, and the two sides had cooperated the most times. At this moment, in the depths of the palace of Arendelle, Soren and Princess Royal stood side by side. Are you really going to compete for the priesthood of death? Princess Royal frowned and looked at Soren and said slowly, "This is not a trivial matter. The gods are watching all this silently. It's very dangerous to get involved at this time. One wrong step and you may lose everything." Soren nodded and said, "I know. But an opportunity like this might not even come once in thousands of years. If I shrink back this time, I'll be in trouble. If I retreat now, I'm afraid I'll have to face the new god of death in the future. After all, I inherited part of the power of the three gods of death. At that time, both Vivian and I will be in danger. I know it's very dangerous to get involved, but I have to try anyway. I'm going to try to persuade the other gods. If I can get their approval, maybe the final difficulty will be less. But what I need most now is your support." After that, Soren looked up at Princess Royal's eyes, waiting for her answer. Princess Royal fell into deep thought. After a long time, she raised her head and looked at Soren. She slowly said, "Since you've already made your decision, why don't you leave? I will support you." "Thank you." Soren was a little emotional and he couldn't help but give Princess Royal a hug. The most crucial step had already been taken. With the support of the Princess Royal, Soren now had a 30% chance of winning. What he needed to do next was to increase his chances of winning even more. Don't celebrate too early. Princess Royal took a few steps back without batting an eyelid. She did not look as calm as she appeared to be. If you really want to compete with Naruto and Clemvox for the priesthood of death, then you need to convince at least 3 more people. Soren nodded when he heard that. Princess Royal gave him an encouraging look and said, "Go and prepare. If you want to convince them, you have to pay a price." In the southern region, Harvest City. When Soren's figure stepped into this beautiful secret realm, the figure of the goddess of agriculture appeared in front of him. Next to her were the goddess of river and the goddess of spring water. The goddess of agriculture seemed a little surprised by Soren's sudden visit. She could not help but wonder, "I heard that Mordor City was attacked by demons. Shouldn't you be in Mordor City at this time? Why did you suddenly think of coming here?" The goddess of agriculture gently waved her hand, and emerald green vines automatically grew from the ground to form several rattan chairs. Her tall figure lay on them and looked at Soren. "Let me guess. You always don't come to the temple for no reason, so this time you must be here for—" She seemed to have thought of something. The goddess of agriculture suddenly raised her head and looked at Soren in surprise and murmured, "Are you going to intervene in the struggle between Naruto and Clemvox?" A smart goddess. Sometimes talking to smart people needs to be straightforward, so Soren nodded and said, "Yes. It's not easy. You're still too young among the gods." The goddess of agriculture frowned and said, "As far as I know, although Clemvox has not appeared for a long time after being ambushed by Naruto, in fact, I secretly learned from many channels that Clemvox has been in contact with many gods. He also draws allies among the gods. Clemvox is very smart. He knows that Naruto is not welcomed by other gods, and many of the gods don't want Naruto to be in charge of the underworld." Soren looked at the goddess of agriculture in front of him and said slowly, "I'm more suitable than them." The goddess of agriculture smiled and shook her head, "But other gods won't believe this. As a true god you rose too quickly. Many gods don't know you well enough and they won't trust you. And you rose by killing other gods. To be honest, many of the gods are afraid of you." Soren also smiled and said, "Isn't that good? Fear can help me solve some problems." The goddess of agriculture frowned slightly and said, "Are you serious?" "Very serious." Soren nodded. At this time, the goddess of agriculture finally fell silent. She pondered for a while and then said, I have to say this is very difficult. Because you're too young, not many gods are willing to stand on your side. Soren nodded and said, I know. So I need your help. Naruto is too extreme. He must pay the price for this huge disaster in the material plane. Because of his ambition, countless creatures died in vain, and all these sins must be borne by him. And Clemvox has already proved his dereliction of duty. If it weren't for his doctrine and bigotry, many undead kings wouldn't have stood on Naruto's side, and this disaster wouldn't have affected countless people. He has already failed once. Even if he regains the clergy of death, the relationship between Clemvox and the undead king still can't be eased, and even the underworld won't return to his control in a short time. The goddess of agriculture was silent. After a while she looked up and stared at Soren and slowly said, Why did you find me? Do you want me to persuade my father? Yes. Soren nodded. If one wanted to control the clergy of death, the god of light was an unavoidable obstacle. Although the god of light's focus was on Asmodeus, the underworld controlled the entire lower plane. The god of light would definitely be involved in who the clergy of death belonged to. Furthermore, according to the original historical progress, the god of light had dealt a heavy blow to the god of death, Nero, and made him pay a painful price for his evil deeds. Soren couldn't win over or even take the initiative to contact the god of light. But the goddess of agriculture could do this. So whether or not he could get the support of the goddess of agriculture was the key. If the goddess of agriculture was willing to stand on his side, Soren's chances of winning would be at least 50%. Chapter 1067. From the sun god to the light of dawn to the god of light. Luashanda played a very important role in the history of the gods. He could even be said to be one of the protagonists in the history of the gods. From the beginning of the calamity of dawn to the destruction of the arcane empire, Luashanda occupied an absolute dominant position among the gods. He represented the part of goodness, light, and justice. Even the queen of spiders, Lolth, whom Soren had always been afraid of, did not dare to make a fart in front of this ancient god. This was because Luashanda was now close to a symbol among the gods, especially after the fall of the original god of justice, Tyr. After the god of light integrated the clergy of justice into himself, his existence was even more revered by the gods. Luashanda had a lot of clergy. In the past, she once had the priesthoods of movement, birth, creativity, dawn, revival, self-protection, spring, vitality, youth, and so on. But she later took these priesthoods and assigned them to other gods. The spring priesthoods of the goddess of agriculture were inherited from her father, and the light of dawn was also given by Roshanda. By now, Roshander's priesthood had been reduced a lot, and his core priesthood had changed to light and justice. He was now the combined form of the sun god and the god of justice, and was currently the most powerful god. In the past, this god's overly aggressive altruism and selflessness hindered his pursuit of goodness. His arrogance and fanaticism covered his thoughts, making him unable to see the inevitable results of his actions. He pursued perfection, but was headstrong and refused to listen to the opinions of others. These shortcomings were fully revealed during the Dawn Calamity, but it was also the great calamity that was second only to the time of troubles that changed him. At that time, Luashanda intended to rebuild a new divine system, but it ended up causing a divinity impact. His failure destroyed several gods and powerful otherworld creatures, caused the collapse of many theocratic countries, and indirectly led to the destruction of the city of Song, Maze Zeno. This failure allowed Luashanda to grow, and when the arcane empire was destroyed, the sacrifice of the father of the oak tree completely changed the god of light. Now, there was no god who could fight against the god of light alone. Even the ancient lady of night was in awe of him. Soren needed the support of the goddess of agriculture. This was because he knew very well that even if he had advanced to become a great divine power, it would still be very difficult for him to be a match for the god of light. Without the support of the god of glory, this plan would become extremely difficult. Due to his deep hatred for the undead creatures, Roshander had made Clemvox the ally of the god of eternal rest before he became the god of light. Although there were some conflicts between the two during the plan to destroy the god of tyranny, Bane, and cracks appeared again during the arcane empire, the god of light still supported Clemvox. That was the problem. If Clemvox still had the support of the god of light, then history would repeat itself. The god of light had appeared and dealt a heavy blow to Naruto, and had indirectly helped Clemvox regain his priesthood. This was not what Soren wanted to see. Klemvox had already proved his dereliction of duty. The turmoil of the undead meant that his doctrine was not in line with the lower planes. Even the ancient god of death, Jianghu, was a little disappointed in this. At present, only the goddess of agriculture could persuade the god of light. Mother Gaia had retired, Father Oak had fallen, and the entire natural divine system had collapsed. Today, the only one who maintained a close relationship with the god of light and could persuade him was the goddess of agriculture. She was the daughter of Mother Gaia and was also the interface between the natural divine system and the human divine system. Harvest City in the half-bit wall of the secret realm. The goddess of agriculture pondered for a long time under Soren's gaze. After a while, a bitter smile appeared on her face and she slowly said, "My relationship with my father is not very good." After Mother Gaia retired. The goddess of agriculture rarely dealt with the god of light, especially after Roshinder entered the depths of mountain paradise. She thought that her father had completely changed. In the past, although Roshinder was a little reckless and opinionated, he was full of enthusiasm, kindness and vitality. However, since Father Oak sacrificed himself to save the material plane, Roshinder had become another existence. He had all the memories of the past Roshinder, but even his daughter, the goddess of agriculture, felt strange. Roshinder was even more pure. The god of light now seemed perfect, but the goddess of agriculture knew that this was because her father gave up a part of his humanity in exchange. The gods in this world kept their humanity to maintain their vitality, but Roshinder now seemed to have been assimilated by light and justice. If the priesthood dominated the gods, then the part of humanity would be missing. As a new god, Soren did not have such an understanding. It would take at least 1,000 years for Soren to feel this. Silence. The goddess of agriculture pondered and considered the gains and losses. After a long time she said, "I can try to help you persuade my father, but I can't guarantee success." Soren smiled and nodded. That's enough. Even if he could not get the support of the god of light, as long as he would not be hostile to him in the process of fighting for the priesthood of death, it would be enough. The goddess of agriculture thought for a moment and said, "If you take over the priesthood of death, how do you plan to fulfill your duties? You must know that this is very important. The believers of the gods have to go to the underworld after death, and the gods of death have always maintained the ancient covenant to be responsible for sending the believers of the gods to the divine kingdom. Also, many gods are very unfriendly to the undead, but with Klemvox's dereliction of duty, you must balance the position of the undead." This was crucial. To persuade the god of light, Soren had to prove that he was worthy of support. However, Soren already had a plan for this. He thought for a moment and said, "Naruto's doctrine is too extreme. He hates life and wants to destroy it. He is too biased towards the undead, which is something that all gods do not want to see. However, Kalimver's teachings are too biased towards the living. His church has always been dedicated to keeping the undead in eternal slumber. Countless undead have been killed by his believers. This has caused his relationship with most of the undead to become tense and hostile. I think in the current situation, a doctrine of the mean is more conducive to the current situation. In my opinion, the realm of eternal sleep is necessary, otherwise the material plane will be overrun with undead sooner or later. But for the undead there is no need to expel and kill them like Klemvox. The most important thing now should be to clarify the boundary between death and immortality. The current chaotic situation is like a repeat of the time of the three gods of death. During the time of Mirko there was the current chaos. Klemvox hated most of the undead and thought that they should be destroyed. For me, the most important thing is to distinguish between death and immortality. As long as the world of the living is not disturbed, there will naturally be a place for the undead to stay in the lower plane. If possible, I hope to divide an area between the underworld and the spiritual world to temporarily appease the undead. As for the future, we can slowly solve it. Soren actually had another set of ideas in mind, but he could not mention it at the moment because it would change the structure of the lower plane, especially the underworld. Now, the most suitable way was a more doctrine of the mean. Dividing the boundary between death and life? The goddess of agriculture smiled and said softly, "If that's the case, I think I have a better chance of persuading my father." The god of light hated all undead. But the existence of the undead could not be erased at all. If Soren really intended to draw a clear boundary between death and life, so that the world of the living would not be disturbed by the undead, then it was very possible to get the support of the god of light. After all, Klemvox's failure had proved that one could not blindly destroy and suppress the undead. Now, the catastrophe of the undead was the revenge of many undead lords for the past. For thousands of years, Clemvox had been working hard to eliminate the undead and let the dead sleep. This caused countless undead to turn their backs on him and even stand beside Naruto to resist him, the king of the undead. If Soren had the same idea as Clemvox, there would be another outbreak of the undead after a few years. Chapter 1068. Soren finally persuaded the goddess of agriculture. With the support of the goddess of agriculture, the next thing would be much easier to do. However, unless the relationship between the gods was particularly close, even allies would have to pay a price for help. However, just as Soren was preparing what the goddess of agriculture needed him to pay, the goddess of agriculture lifted her long hair and smiled gently. "No hurry, I'll let you know when I need it." In this regard, Soren couldn't help but frown and look at the other party seriously. The cost and the gain were equal. In this case, the goddess of agriculture was not in a hurry to make requests, so the requests in the future should not exceed the current cost. But now was not the time to worry about this. He finally smiled and said, "Then I'll wait for your good news." The goddess of agriculture nodded and said, "Well, I'll go to the glorious city tomorrow." There was not much time. After getting the promise of the goddess of agriculture, Soren immediately set off to return to the outer islands, but his destination was not the city of Mordor, but the city of Wealth on the south coast. It was not long before the end of the Avatar crisis. So much time had passed in the blink of an eye. After experiencing many shocks, the past glory of the city of Wealth was no longer there. However, the Church of the Goddess of Wealth was still the most powerful force here, and when the war subsided, commerce and trade would inevitably be revitalized. The Goddess of Wealth was very welcoming to Soren's arrival. In the past in-depth exchanges between the two sides, Soren had already given the Goddess of Wealth guidance, so that she had enough confidence to restore trade and economy after the war. Now what the Goddess of Wealth needed to do was to wait for the end of the Avatar crisis. At that time, many caravans of the Goddess of Wealth would set sail again. The gods had already felt it. Perhaps because of Soren's interference, the trajectory of fate had deviated to a certain extent. Although there were still many gods who fell, it was still a little less than in the past. And because there was no interference from adventurers, the number of gods who directly participated in the battle between the gods had decreased a lot, which also reduced the number of deaths. Perhaps it was because of Soren's example, the number of gods who were hiding in their fields had obviously increased. Even the Queen of Spiders, Loltha's aggro had decreased a lot compared to before. This was because many of the gods' kills had been stolen by Soren, and some of their aggro had shifted to Soren's side. The Queen of Spiders' biggest enemy was still the elven gods. "Welcome, sir. Lord Shadow." The Goddess of Wealth was wearing a long dress that shone with golden light. She looked very elegant. She personally appeared in front of the temple to welcome Soren's arrival. Soren smiled and followed her inside. The negotiation this time was very easy, especially after they had received so much support. The Goddess of Wealth had also given them some help. Soren stayed in the Temple of Wealth for a day, and then went to the place where he first rose, which was Port Tylon, controlled by the Sea Goddess. Port Tylon. Because it was an island, the impact wasn't that great. The High Priestess of the Sea Temple still maintained the order of the past, and began to pray every morning. But today seemed to be a little different. When her prayer sounded, the power of the statue of the Goddess of Ocean emitted a golden light. She thought that her prayer had been answered by the goddess, but then she saw a beautiful woman with a trident coming down from the statue. The Sea Goddess's target wasn't her, but walked directly to the front of the temple, as if she was welcoming someone's arrival. Soren's figure appeared. He smiled and nodded at the Sea Goddess in front of him, and the Sea Goddess also bowed slightly. Both sides didn't care about the others around them, and the High Priestess of the Sea Temple looked at Soren in a daze. After noticing the faintly discernible sight, she immediately lowered her head humbly. Soren was now a great existence that she needed to look up to. As a god who had cooperated with Soren in the beginning, the Sea Goddess was easily persuaded by Soren. She was willing to help Soren and assist him in obtaining the clergy of death. This was good news, because after Soren's lobbying he had gained a lot of support. Now, Soren only had one goal left: Moonlight Woodland. This beautiful forest was located near the ruins of the Silver Moon City. It had a special lock and was also the core area of the intersection of the Silver Moon City. In order to guard against the attack of the Lady of the Night, there were many moonwalkers stationed here. The magic circle here could absorb the tidal power of the moon, and even the gods were not sure if they could break it. When Soren arrived, it was still calm. Because the goddess of magic was not dead, the power of the Lady of the Silver Moon had not recovered much, so she was still only at the level of a mid-level divine power. If the goddess of magic died and the power of the Lady of the Silver Moon returned, then this goddess would at least be at the level of a great divine power. It could be said that Soren's interference in history had the greatest impact on her. Although the Lady of the Silver Moon herself didn't know this, and she didn't even want the goddess of magic to die. The goddesses of magic of the past were like close allies and daughters of the Lady of the Silver Moon. Soren couldn't find the goddess of magic, but he thought that the Moonlight Woodland was the most likely place to hide her. This place was protected by a powerful lock. There were moonwalkers stationed here, and in addition there were also powerful Silver Star emissaries, spellcasters who could mobilize the power of the moon. Soren's arrival was not hidden. As the light of divinity fell, Soren's clone directly appeared outside the Moonlight Woodland. Soon a group of tall moonwalkers appeared. Their leader was a grassland elf. The elf frowned as she looked at Soren and bowed slightly. She then said, "Lord Shadow, welcome." In the depths of the Moonlight Woodland, a light rose. The Lady of the Silver Moon already knew of Soren's arrival and sent an oracle to welcome him. Soren nodded slightly and followed the moonwalkers into the woodland. This was a private kingdom, and almost all of them were believers of the Lady of the Silver Moon. However, Soren also saw some secret knights, which made him even more certain that the goddess of magic was hiding here. The two goddesses had joined forces and were secretly plotting something. Lord Shadow. The Lady of the Silver Moon's figure appeared on the altar in front of him. Soren didn't have many interactions with her, so they weren't close, but they weren't strangers either. Soren bowed slightly to show his respect. Lady of the Silver Moon. Su Luan stared at Soren in front of her. She frowned slightly and said with a smile, "Welcome. But I'm curious as to why you chose to visit at this time." Soren met her gaze and calmly said, "I'm here to visit the Lady of the Silver Moon. And Lady Mistra." Mistra was the goddess of magic. The Lady of the Silver Moon hesitated for a moment in response to Soren's straightforwardness. She then asked, "How did you know she was here?" "I guessed." Soren smiled. This was the most likely place for the goddess of magic to be. It was also the only place where she could hide from the gods. Even after so long, they still couldn't find any trace of her. Long time no see. A tall, slender, and beautiful young human woman with translucent skin and flowing black hair appeared in the form of a long flowing black hair. She wore a simple but elegant dark silk robe and a net belt embedded with gems. This item represented the magic network that Mistra was in charge of. This was the goddess of magic's usual incarnation. Soren had the divine title of tracking, so it wasn't surprising that he could find the goddess of magic. Thus Mistra simply showed up. Soren met Mistra's gaze and smiled. Long time no see. Lady Mistra. This was Soren's final goal. Because of her relationship with Klemvox in the past, she was a great help to Klemvox in his quest to regain his divine title of death. Since the Lady of the Night was also involved in this battle, the two goddesses would secretly help Klemvox regain his divine title. They were Soren's last obstacle. What Soren needed to do was to find a way to persuade them and gain the support of the goddess of magic and the Lady of the Silver Moon to weaken them and strengthen himself. To put it bluntly, that was, Soren had to knock on Klemvox's wall. Only in this way could he gain the greatest advantage. P.S. This book is almost finished. Don't worry. There's an epilogue after this. The epilogue is about the kingdom of God and spans 10 years. Chapter 1069. There was no doubt about it. Mistra was in a difficult position right now. It was obvious from her conflicted expression that she was in a dilemma. The Lady of Silver Moon had no intention of helping either. After all, she had to make her own choice. She had also guessed that the goddess of magic was able to escape her previous ambush thanks to Soren's help. However, she didn't know what kind of relationship Soren had with Mistra. The gods of this world were relatively open-minded. In some ways they were similar to the unrestrained Olympian gods. However, they had been silent for far too long. No one knew what would happen in the long history of this world. Even the gods could be wiped out. The goddess of magic stared at Soren, her eyes flickering. She was Mistra. She was also Midnight, a former human mage. Klemvox was her lover before she became a god. Although their relationship gradually faded, there was still some history between them. On the other hand, Soren was her close ally. To some extent, he could even be considered her current lover, or so she thought. If she had to choose between the two, it would undoubtedly be difficult. One was her past lover and the other was her current lover. Although the former was far away, they still had a past. The latter, on the other hand, had saved her life once and helped Mistra survive a life-threatening crisis. How should she choose? Soren seemed to sense the goddess of magic's dilemma. He looked a little disappointed. I don't want to make things difficult for you. However, this is a battle of fate. Whether it's me, Clemvox, or Naruto, this battle is unavoidable. It's inevitable that the three gods of death will reunite. The future world also needs this power. The Bator Inferno is restless. At this point, Soren glanced at the two goddesses' expressions. As expected, their expressions changed slightly. He then continued, perhaps you don't know, but Sirik has already broken free from his seal. He's also secretly watching everything. The undead hated Clemvox, which made Naruto even more powerful. Whether it's Naruto or Sirik, neither of them can become the winner. I'm not asking you to help me fight against Clemvox. I just hope that if the final battle is between me and Clemvox, I won't be your enemy. It seemed that it would be difficult to win over the goddess of magic as an ally, which disappointed Soren greatly. Even though he had saved the goddess and helped her through a crisis, she still couldn't stand by his side. It could be seen from the very beginning. After the goddess of magic was injured, she never appeared in front of Soren. Instead, she hid in the Silver Moon Lady's place. Soren, who was extremely disappointed, had already excluded the goddess of magic from his circle. Someone who couldn't stand behind him at such a critical moment wasn't worth his effort. However, he still had to fight for it, so he said, I only hope a little. You can stay out of the battle between me and Clemvox. If the final victor is me and him, then I hope you can stay neutral. It seemed that he couldn't win over the goddess of magic. For this reason, Soren could only lower his request and ask her to stay out of the battle between him and Clemvox. This was already a very low request. After all, Soren had saved her once. Mistra's eyes wavered a little, but she was also relieved. She even felt a little sorry for Soren. In fact, Clemvox had met her a long time ago and asked for her help against his enemy. However, at that time, the goddess of magic hadn't recovered from her injuries, so she didn't agree. In contrast, Soren's request was much lower. He didn't force her to help, but only hoped that she would stay neutral and not be his enemy. At this point, the goddess of magic had no choice. The goddess of magic had no other choice. She could either agree to Soren's request or become his enemy in the future. This wasn't something that anyone wanted. Thus, the goddess of magic quickly replied, I can promise you. I'll stay neutral between you and Clemvox. Soren nodded. Then, he bowed slightly to the Lady of Silver Moon and left the forest. To be honest, he was still very disappointed. However, some things couldn't be forced. It could only be said that the goddess of magic couldn't stand on his side this time. In the following battle between her and Lady of the Night, Soren wouldn't help her either. According to the progress of history, the goddess of magic would be at a disadvantage in the next battle. In the past, even with the help of adventurers, the goddess of magic couldn't defeat Lady of the Night. This time, Soren wouldn't help her. Whether she could survive or not would depend on her luck. Because the goddess of magic's choice had exhausted the last bit of affection between Soren and her. Soren left the Moonlight Forest, but this time he didn't leave with a smile. Only his eyes were a little cold. Just after Soren left, the Lady of Silver Moon shook her head and sighed. You still can't let go of your past with Clemvox? In fact, you should choose to work with Soren. He's a powerful and scheming god. Moreover, he holds the divine title of Shadow, and doesn't have a good relationship with Lady of the Night. If you agree with him, it's very likely that we'll be able to pull him to our side. Hearing the Lady of Silver Moon's words, Mistra's eyes flickered. Although every Mistra would inherit the memories of her previous life, the consciousness that dominated was still Midnight. In other words, Midnight only had the memories of the past goddess of magic, but her thoughts were still her own. This caused her to unconsciously lean towards Clemvox. Today's actions had undoubtedly pushed Solen's relationship with him further away. For a moment, even the goddess of magic felt a little lost. After all, Soren had saved her once and the two of them were quite close. This choice undoubtedly hurt his feelings. The goddess of magic suddenly felt a little regretful. But at this point there was no other choice. She could only look in the direction Soren left and let out a deep sigh. Outside the Moonlight Forest, just as Soren's clone was about to return to the south coast, he suddenly felt the aura of battle. Then his figure appeared near a hill. There were many corpses here. He bent down and picked up an emblem from one of the corpses. The emblem was 5 hands holding a scimitar in a circle. A follower of the god of war, Klemvox? Soren frowned and muttered, "Looks like the god of war is finally going to make a move against the god of war." There wasn't only one god of war. Many gods of war had been born from this divine title, but the most powerful one was undoubtedly the god of war, Tempest. He was the victor in history. At least 10 gods of war had been born in the long history. The god of war had been trying to eliminate them since the time of Mother Earth. At present, the only surviving god of war in the human god system was the god of war that Soren had just mentioned. One of the 2 gods was a lesser god, and the other was a greater god. It looks like the god of war is going to take back all the divine titles of war. It was a battle without any suspense. Soren took a look and left. The gods were all planning something. There were too many things happening in the Avatar crisis, and he didn't have the energy to participate in many of them. It was almost time. It was getting closer and closer to the promotion ceremony of Naro. This battle would be a big mess. As for who would be the winner in the end, no one knew. Soren also had to make more preparations. Klemvox had obviously started to act. The goddess of magic didn't agree to stand behind him. There was no doubt that Klemvox had secretly looked for her. Since he had already looked for the goddess of magic, Klemvox would definitely try to rope in other gods. Soren had to be more prepared. The most important thing now was the god of light's attitude. As long as the god of light supported him, then the goddess of magic's attitude wasn't too important. After all, there was still the Lady of Night watching in the dark. Chapter 1070. Long Sleep, Realm. This kind of power was mostly given by the gods of order. Kalemver, Jurgal, Osiris, the god of death of the Muhammad pantheon, and Ulugilan, the god of death of the Halfling pantheon, all had the power to give the realm of eternal rest. Soren slowly let go of the secret scroll in his hand and then murmured, "Long Sleep, Realm." If he wanted to compete for the clergy of death, then the Long Sleep Realm was something that must be maintained. Without the Long Sleep Realm, it meant that the dead would be disturbed, and a large number of the dead would not be able to rest in peace. Things were not too bad. Shortly after Soren returned to the city of Moder, he received a message from the goddess of agriculture. The god of light seemed to support him a little. It seemed that the god of light was disappointed with Klemvox this time. Although he thought that Naruto should pay the greatest price for all this, Klemvox also had an unshirkable responsibility. In the long history, there had never been such a big undead riot among the previous gods of death. Since the ancient god of death, Jurgal, many undead had been suppressed in the lower planes. Although this time it was because of the Avatar crisis, Klemvox undoubtedly failed in his duty. Perhaps it was because of this that Soren came into contact with Naruto. This ancient one seemed to have the idea of selecting a new successor. The god of light has made some progress. Although he did not win over the goddess of magic, he also kept her neutral. Jurgal does not seem to support Klemvox very much. No wonder he met me, it should be because of the power of slaughter. Naruto, Klemvox, Sirik. There are many undead kings behind Naruto, and his power is still the strongest at present. And this time the undead disaster was launched by him. Naruto has the most powerful power of death. Klemvox's strength has been greatly reduced, but his secret allies should still have some. Sirik's power is the weakest, and his relationship with the gods is also the worst. Therefore, in the following battle he should be hiding in the dark. He pondered for a long time. Soren finally opened his eyes and muttered to himself, "Death is still Klemvox's domain." In other words, in Klemvox's eyes, Naruto is his greatest enemy. As long as he defeats Naruto, he will be able to recover his strength. At that time, no one will be able to stop him from taking back the Death Priesthood. Naruto understands this very well. As long as he defeats Klemvox, he will be the undisputed god of death. In that case, my target should be Sirik. Only by killing Sirik first and letting Klemvox and Naruto exhaust a bit of their strength will I have more confidence in killing them. On the surface, the main forces of this battle were still Naruto and Klemvox. Soren was just a schemer, so it was best for him to kill the other schemer first. The power of death was getting stronger and stronger. Now, the population of the material plane was only about 40% of what it used to be. The undead kings obtained a large number of souls from the material plane. This was their reward, and it was also something that Naruto acquiesced to. Naruto's promotion ceremony should be launched within this month, and what Soren needed to do now was to find traces of Sirik. Come. Soren's figure appeared in the Great Temple, and he ordered the arcane assassin who served him, send the rogues in the central area to find out any news about Sirik. Also, send someone to check on the Pygmy God system. Sirik seemed to have attacked the Pygmy God system. He was a cunning god and he was always thinking of ways to strengthen himself. Time passed little by little. With the gathering of the power of death, Klemvox's church suddenly became active. The members of Klemvox's church were usually silent, to the point of being gloomy. Many of the members joined the ranks of the undead king after losing their loved ones to the invasion of the undead creatures, or even after experiencing death themselves, and being brought back to the mortal world. There was no doubt that Klemvox's church grew stronger in the current environment. After Klemvox's return, the church quickly recruited a group of people who were affected by the undead disaster. Naruto won the support of the dead and Klemvox won the support of the living. In this disaster, too many people were killed by the undead, and their surviving relatives joined Klemvox's church. The counterattack against the undead began after the dragon which church was severely injured by the giant dragon. Perhaps the gods could no longer tolerate Naruto's actions, or perhaps Klemvox persuaded the other gods. Currently, at least 3 gods began to launch a counterattack against the undead. The glorious city finally made a move. The paladins gathered and began to attack the undead's base camp. Under the influence of this, the other gods' churches also began to take action. As a god from another world, Naruto's biggest weakness was finally exposed. That was, he did not have many allies among the gods. Naruto was an absolute supporter of those who did evil for their own pleasure. In Naruto's cold world, everything was the same. To him, all living creatures were a great insult to him, the god of death. On the contrary, all dying creatures shone with green and black sparks of joy, and he liked these sparks. Some people did not pray to Naruto sincerely, hoping to obtain Naruto's power. Most of them were given death as a reward by Naruto. The god's goal was Naruto's temple. This was the origin of all death and also the source of the outbreak of the undead disaster. However, Naruto's temples were usually hidden. Even in places full of evil, they were usually built underground and were usually part of the underground tomb. Most of the temples contained undead creatures and other creatures that spread death or created death, such as banshees and devils. Therefore, the gods soon realized that something was wrong. This was because their church had encountered another terrifying enemy, and that was devils. Yes, the devils seemed to have joined Naruto's camp. In the counterattacks, people suddenly found traces of many devils near Naruto's temples. This made people feel uneasy. Klemvox's church pushed forward in the first wave of attacks. But when the church members found more and more Naruto's underground temples, they encountered very fierce resistance. Large numbers of undead creatures, numerous necromancers, and higher devils gradually appeared. Lesser devils, imps, horned devils. At first only a few low-ranked devils appeared, but as the battle escalated, the shadows of Babas, chain devils, and zoo devils, hellcats, lustful devils, overlords, ice devils, and horned devils gradually appeared. Finally, when the abyss devils appeared in Naruto's camp, the gods finally realized the severity of the situation. Klemvox's church was once again damaged. The evil devils were involved in this battle. After the abyss had continuously probed the material plane many times, the cunning devils finally entered the material plane for the first time. And this time they chose to support the evil Naruto. At this moment, many gods even suspected that the outbreak of the undead disaster was the scheme of the incomparably evil existence that lived in the depths of the Bator Inferno. Chapter 1071. Everything was for the sake of souls. In fact, whether it was the high and mighty gods, the demons of the bottomless abyss, or the Bator Inferno, the most important wealth was souls. For a long time, whether it was the Bator Inferno or the bottomless abyss, the number of souls that could be obtained from the river Styx was extremely limited. Most of the high-quality souls were divided among the gods. After all, the faithless were only a small part of them. The remaining souls were all ugly and not very useful. That was why there were special existences like soul stealers in the lower planes. Generations of death gods were strictly guarded against the Bator Inferno and the bottomless abyss because the responsibility of the death gods was to maintain the flow of the river Styx and maintain the home of souls after death. Therefore, the most common opponent of the death god servants were the soul stealers from the lower planes. And now it seemed that Naruto had colluded with the demons. Most of the underworld had fallen into Naruto's control. Some undead lords had also reached into the underworld. After the underworld lost control of Clemvox, there was no doubt that the demons had also taken a share of the loot. Naruto had betrayed the River Styx's interests. In order to make the demons take action, they had to give them benefits that they could see, and it would be best if they could get it right away. Now that the demons' army was escorting Naruto, the gods could be sure that a part of the River Styx had been stolen by the demons. This discovery made the gods a little angry and uneasy, because all gods followed a basic principle, and that was, unless the souls of the believers were particularly outstanding, such as those that were close to the level of the holy spirits, they would be sent to the gods' kingdoms by the death god servants after passing through the River Styx. But now, who would still believe in Naruto's death god servants? Who wouldn't be worried that their believers' souls would be stolen and desecrated by the demons? Far away in the east, just as the southern part of the continent began to counterattack against the undead, many monasteries in the eastern countries also joined forces to eliminate the mummies and undead. Some of the members of the Dragon Witch cult had fled to the Desert of Death, but they did not give up because Nero was still very powerful. They had joined the god of death, Nero, and captured many flying dragon subspecies to create a new batch of low-level dragon liches. These were puppets controlled by the Dragon Witch sect. Although they were slightly weaker, they obeyed orders. At this moment, near a barren mountain range, one of the allied forces from the Eastern Kingdom was approaching this mountain range. The undead in the depths of the desert were all awakened by Naruto's evil power. For a long time, Naruto's church had been spreading in the desert. Among the allied forces from the eastern countries, the figure of the young girl Cicada was a little eye-catching. On one hand, she was too young. Standing among a group of middle-aged legendary monks, she was very eye-catching. On the other hand, it was because she belonged to a new force. This fist master's reputation had soared in the battle against the ancient evil. Now she was already the leader of the Night Shadow monk group. The members of the monk group were blessed by the Shadow Lord. They could master and strengthen the special skills of Shadow Nanda and Lunar Shadow. This power allowed them to completely hide themselves and jump through the shadow space to a certain extent, making the monks' movements more erratic. This was the group of monks blessed by Soren. Compared to the past, Cicada had quickly matured after many battles, especially after becoming the leader of the monk group. She also had a trace of a superior aura. The situation in the Eastern Kingdom had improved a lot. After the elimination of the ancient evil, the remaining enemies were much easier to deal with. The Luo demons had been defeated, and some of the Een spirits had been resealed. At present, the only troublesome thing was the mummy army. The god of death, Nero, had awakened many ancient mummies. Some ancient pyramids even had mummies sealed in them that were older than the Arcane Kingdom. This battle was very crucial, because below this place was Naruto's great temple, a base camp for awakening and reviving the undead. There were standards for the size of the temples that served the gods. The lowest level was the altar, then the altar, the temple, the great temple, and then the great temple. As for the Pantheon temple, it had not appeared in the material plane yet. The altar was very simple. It could be activated after a blood sacrifice. The altar was a little more troublesome. At the very least, it needed to be continuously sacrificed and prayed for a period of time. Then there was the temple, which was the place where the gods responded and prayed and sacrificed for many years. Generally, the temples of the gods would only appear in towns and cities, and it would take several years to build, and it would often last for decades before the glory of divinity shrouded it. The temple was the official headquarters of the church. A temple was equivalent to half a wizard tower, and most of the temples took decades or centuries to build, so these temples often did not change their positions easily. Finally, there was the Great Temple. Such a place must be covered by a trace of the god's mind. Just like Soren's Great Temple, he could easily perceive what was happening inside. The Great Temple itself was equivalent to the core camp, and the statues inside were all possessed by the god's body. At present, even Soren only had one Great Temple, and it was only in the center of Motor City. Other than that, the highest level in other places was the temple level. The destruction of any great temple by the enemy was a serious blow to the gods, and even directly weakened the power of the gods and the church to some extent. Therefore, the defense here was also very strong. Naruto's collusion with the devils had caused too much hostility. Not only did the eastern countries launch a counterattack, but other places were also looking for and destroying Naruto's temples. At this time, at the top of the mountain in front, hundreds of Dracolic were hovering in the sky. This place was guarded by the remaining members of the Dracolic religion. In addition to the believers of Naruto's church, there were also some devils. The White Cloud sect and the Shadow sect can be responsible for the surprise attack. A fist master with white eyebrows sat on a chair and said to the other monasteries and forces present, "But those Dracolic are very difficult to deal with. They fly in the air and it's difficult for monks to deal with them." Monks could fly in the air for a short period of time, but they had to learn the ethereal form, which most monks could not do. The others frowned when they heard this. All the forces gathered here were from the eastern countries, and the monasteries were the mainstream. Monks were very strong on the ground, but it was hard to say if they were in the sky. There was a short pause. Then the fist master looked at the Empress of the East on the right and said slowly, "I think only the Empress has a way to deal with these Dracolic." Many monasteries' eyes lit up when they heard this. The Empress of the East fell into silence. After a while she said, "Yes. I will summon ancient allies to deal with them." Chapter 1072. Good. The fist master stood up excitedly. He looked around at the others and his gaze paused on Cicada for a moment. He said in a deep voice, "Then prepare to attack. This time we must get rid of these undead and bring peace back to the Eastern Kingdom." The leaders of the various forces went to prepare. Before Cicada left, she glanced at the Eastern Princess. Legend had it that this princess had some kind of mysterious power. She could summon a powerful creature from the depths of the Eastern Mountains. The battle soon broke out. The next day the monks attacked the members of the dragon witch cult in front of them. As the battle broke out, the Dracolic circling the mountaintop also moved quickly. One by one the flying dragons soared into the sky. Hundreds of undead subspecies wyverns almost covered the sky, causing countless people to feel a trace of depression. They exuded a strong aura of death all over their bodies, and the ghostly green soul fire danced in their pupils. Ordinary people would be frightened just by a glance, and even professionals would find it difficult to deal with these enemies. The droll hated these undead, but they couldn't do anything to them. No transformation spell could deal with so many Dracolic, and most spells couldn't easily attack the flying dragons in the sky. However, at this moment, a strange melody suddenly came from the back of the camp. Accompanied by the sacrificial ceremony of many beautiful dancers, some kind of strange fluctuation quickly spread to the farthest place. This was a very ancient dance of the Magisprius. The Oriental dancer's predecessor was actually a witch, and the dance was first born to communicate with heaven and earth and offer sacrifices to the gods. Although history had changed a lot, and the existence of witches had almost disappeared in the Eastern Kingdom, some ancient Magisprius were still preserved, and the one the Eastern Princess had mastered was the most powerful one. A strange drumbeat sounded. A bonfire was burning in the center of the altar. Many graceful Oriental dancers were dancing in a special ritual dress. Their sleeves were fluttering in the wind, and the one leading the dance was the Empress of the East, whose face was covered by a veil. The battle was still going on. Because of the existence of the Dracolic, the monks, droll, warlocks, and rangers didn't have much of an advantage. It could even be said that they were suppressed by the enemy. However, along with the loud and clear cry of an eagle, a gust of howling wind suddenly came from the distant sky. A gigantic eagle appeared in their line of sight. It had a pair of golden wings that were graceful and full of power. When it spread its wings, it left a shadow on the ground. Even from afar, one could feel the aura of an overlord of the sky. Giant Eagle. It's the Eastern Giant Eagle. A flock of Eastern Giant Eagles with wingspans of more than 10 meters flew over from the horizon. They had sharp claws and beaks that looked as if they were made of metal. Part of their feathers were gold, while the other part was pale gold. These Eastern Giant Eagles carried a trace of special pressure. When they appeared, even the Dracolic became restless. They felt uneasy as if they were facing their natural enemy. In the Far East, legend had it that there was a creature that could fight against the dragons. It was the Eastern Giant Eagle that lived on the peak of the Eastern Mountains. It was a magnificent mountain that reached the sky and was called the Eagle Mountain. These great Eastern Eagles were even faster than the great dragons. Legend had it that they lived at the very edge of the Eastern Kingdom, which was also the edge of the material plane. Beyond the Eagle Mountain was an endless sea of clouds. After the Eastern Giant Eagles appeared, many droll and monks who had not joined the battle bowed to the leading Golden Giant Eagle. The Eastern Giant Eagles held a very high position in the hearts of these people. Many of the monk school's trials went to the Eagle Mountain in the Sea of Clouds at the edge of the world. A drill school of the Eastern Kingdom's goal was to transform into an Eastern giant eagle. The loud cry of the eagles resounded through the sky. These Eastern giant eagles swooped down at the Dracolic in front of them like ferocious predators. Their speed was so fast that they were like lightning streaking across the sky. They attacked the enemy's vital points the moment they attacked, keenly attacking the weak points of the flying dragon subspecies. Suddenly, a series of roars came from the sky. The figure of the Dracolic fell from the sky, and countless golden blood-stained feathers fluttered down. The Eastern giant eagles suppressed the Dracolic in front of them. However, dragons were still the kings of the sky. The Eastern giant eagles paid a heavy price in the battle. In just the first round of battle, 5 or 6 Eastern giant eagles fell from the sky. However, these Eastern giant eagles did not retreat at all. They followed the ancient covenant, and there was never any thought of retreat in their eyes. They were brave and fearless. In ancient times, these Eastern giant eagles had once served the sun, so their feathers were blessed by the gods and turned golden. Although they no longer had a god to serve, every Eastern giant eagle had been constantly rushing higher into the sky from the moment they were born. When they got closer to the radiance of the sun, their wings would transform into a golden color. Eastern giant eagle, neutral good, challenge rating 16. The fierce battle was still going on. However, as soon as the Eastern great eagle appeared, a faintly discernible gaze was cast upon the battlefield. Soren watched everything. He did not expect the Eastern giant eagles to enter the battlefield before the last wave of demons. According to his memory, these ancient creatures were finally summoned by the god of light. The most common type of eagle in the material plane was the ferocious eagle, while the Eastern giant eagles belonged to another branch of the mythical eagle. The ferocious eagle's challenge rating was 3, while the mythical eagle's challenge rating was 6. The basic challenge rating of the Eastern giant eagles was 12. If they turned golden, their challenge rating would be 16, which was enough to compete with many young dragons. When these creatures reached a certain level of strength, they would directly go to the upper plane. At that time they would become the Eastern giant eagle, heavenly realm, challenge rating 18. The other branch would roam the astral plane. Their bodies would become quite terrifying, and their challenge rating would be 22 and above. However, they were extremely rare. They were created during the sun god's time, which was to say, they served Shanda in his previous life. The Dracolic fell one by one, and the number of Eastern giant eagles decreased. When the enemies in front of them broke through, some ancient and wise beings appeared on the battlefield. They looked like humans, but they were not completely human. These ancient beings were the tree shepherds, followers of the oak tree's father. Since the oak tree's father sacrificed himself, the tree shepherds left the Droll order. They stayed in the eastern desert, constantly healing the world's wounds. Golden seeds were planted one by one. The tree shepherds were not as slow and powerless as they looked. With the surging of the force of nature, towering trees rose from the ground. These were the trees that they planted in the depths of the desert. When the catastrophe came, these trees that had spirituality gathered all their vitality into a seed and let the tree shepherds take it away. Welcome the wrath of nature. With a low roar, the giant trees in front of him suddenly came to life. They turned into huge tree ants that rose from the ground and walked forward with the earth trembling. Traces of strange power were connected to Soren's heart. When these tree ants appeared, Soren's plant domain suddenly became restless. He tried to infuse his consciousness into one of the golden oak trees. Suddenly, Soren realized that he had succeeded. He entered the tree ant, and in an instant, the golden oak tree in front of him grew rapidly and turned into a giant tree ant that was more than 20 meters tall. Glory of the oak tree's father. The tree shepherds became restless for a moment, but it quickly calmed down. Soren tried to move his body. This was a temporary incarnation, and it seemed that the plant domain had taken control of the golden oak tree in front of him. This feeling was completely different from before. His movements were a lot slower, but each of his movements was full of strength. Soren even felt that he could easily defeat an adult dragon. The roots of the tree were connected to the ground. A steady stream of energy flowed into his body from the ground, healing his injuries and replenishing his mana. Soren tried to wave his hand in front of him, and countless vines rose from the ground. They were like flying ropes that entangled the enemies in front of him. Then he approached with heavy steps, and with just a light punch, a powerful enemy was smashed into meat paste. What a terrifying strength. The golden tree ant he turned into was even stronger than his demon form. Chapter 1073. The tree shepherds were a little excited. They seemed to think that the golden ent that Soren had infused was related to the father of the oak tree. Thus, many ent guards surrounded Soren and cooperated with him to break through the enemy's defense line. This was something that Soren had never experienced before. After transforming into a golden ent, Soren's defensive abilities were shocking. He was basically immune to normal physical attacks, and his resistance to magic was also shocking. Under the absolute suppression of his size and strength, any of Soren's normal attacks were comparable to that of an old dragon. Neither the Dracolic nor the demons were his match. A group of ent forced their way to the entrance of the temple like tanks. Behind them were countless corpses of Naruto's followers, but their battle was basically over. Because the ent's body was too large, the entrance of the temple could not be entered at all. Next, it was time for the monks to show off their skills. Many monks, rangers, and droll began to advance, and Cicada looked thoughtfully at the golden ent that Soren had transformed into. She felt a familiar aura, but she was not sure if it was. A fierce battle broke out. This was a battle that would determine whether or not the Desert of Death could be settled down. Many monasteries had sent out their higher-ups. There were dozens of legendary monks and druids in the area visible to the naked eye. Soren tried to break away from his ent's avatar. As Soren's figure left, the incomparably tall golden ent immediately shrunk to a height of 12 meters. The ent shepherds nearby seemed to be in deep thought, as if they had felt something. The father of the oak tree did not fall. He has only fallen into a deep sleep, but he is still watching us. An old ent shepherd said excitedly, as if Soren's avatar was the father of the oak tree's divine will. However, Soren knew that the father of the oak tree had truly fallen. Although he could not understand how it existed, the gods could not sense the father of the oak tree, so it should be dead, to a certain extent. Otherwise, the god of light would have done everything he could to revive Father Oak. As a former god of nature, Loshanda had always believed that the existence of Father Oak was an indispensable part of the world. With the power of Father Oak, it would be much easier to repair the damage to the material plane. The battle continued. There had been a large number of Naruto believers in the temple for a long time, and many devils had been summoned to the material plane. However, Soren had nothing to do with the upcoming battle. In fact, it wasn't just the Eastern Kingdoms that were searching for and destroying Naruto's shrine on the other side of the continent. Siric's aura? When Soren's divine sense left the golden oak tree, he sensed a familiar aura. At the back of the martial monks, a legendary rogue seemed a little out of place. He didn't look like a human from the Eastern Kingdom. Standing among the group of martial monks, he was a little eye-catching. At the same time, Soren felt the power of the three gods of death from him. Siric's chosen. Soren seemed to have found something, and his expression suddenly became a little surprised. Because of the clergy of murder, Siric's ability to sneak and hide was amazing. Soren had been looking for him for a long time and couldn't find him or his chosen. He didn't expect to find one here. It's all thanks to Sir Madeira this time. An old droll nodded slightly to express his gratitude to the rogue that Soren noticed. If Sir Madeira hadn't found this temple, I'm afraid this time's turmoil wouldn't have been so easy. Madeira was the rogue. He looked like an elegant middle-aged noble. After hearing the words, he waved his hand and said, "It's everyone's duty to fight against the evil Naruto. You don't have to thank me for this. Let's destroy these evil people in one go." Hearing his words, Soren suddenly thought of something. It seemed that this rogue had found Naruto's shrine, then told the martial monks and joined forces with them to launch an attack. What is Siric planning to do? Is he using the power of others to weaken Naruto's strength? Soren absolutely didn't believe that Siric's chosen would be a righteous ally, so the only explanation was to use external forces to attack the enemy. Many high-level monks joined the battle. However, the rogue named Madeira didn't join them. He quietly escaped into the shadows and then left to the other side of the battlefield. This was a chosen with the ability to permanently hide. No one noticed his departure. Sauron was the only one who noticed him and quietly followed behind him with his incarnation. The rogue left and went straight south. After about 10 kilometers, he came to the vicinity of a hidden underground cave. This god's chosen one vigilantly observed the surroundings and set up a trigger trap before cautiously entering. A little trap was not a problem for Soren. He quickly slipped into the shadows and followed. Then, after a series of twists and turns, he arrived at a hidden basement. It was a very simple altar. It didn't seem to have been built for much time, at most half a month. "My lord." The chosen knelt in front of the altar and prayed, "Madeira has completed his task." The fools of the monastery are attacking Naruto's shrine. It seems that we can completely destroy them today. A shadow appeared. A hazy body appeared in the distortion, and then a man with a pale face appeared. Very good. Siric's incarnation was full of joy and pride. He nodded and said, "Continue to prepare. Naruto is about to hold the promotion ceremony, and Clemvox is about to launch an attack. Our opportunity is right in front of us." Madara was also excited when he heard this. "Yes. My lord will retake death." Siric's figure faded. He didn't recover much power. Although he plotted against the pygmy gods, he also offended a new enemy. He had to find a way to sow discord to find an opportunity. The incarnation of divinity gradually dissipated. Such a simple altar couldn't sustain Siric's incarnation for long. Soon, his divine sense left the place and Madara began to destroy the altar. He couldn't let anyone know of Siric's existence because Clemvox also hated Siric. However, at this moment the space around them suddenly became still. A dark figure turned solid. Soren's incarnation suddenly appeared and directly grabbed Madara's neck. Then he used an extremely difficult mind control spell to control Madara. "I didn't expect to catch a big fish here." Soren's expression was full of joy. He activated his tracking domain and murmured, "I finally found you. You cunning fox." A trace of divine power spread out. Soren instantly captured the fluctuations of the altar and determined a coordinate in the far south. At the same time he used the soul interrogation spell on the chosen in front of him. He believed that he could interrogate a lot of useful information from the chosen's soul. Chapter 1074. This time he really caught a big fish. Siric sowed discord and used the power of the monasteries in the Eastern Kingdom to fight against Naruto's church. But he never thought that Soren had been paying attention to the Eastern Kingdom and caught him by the tail. In terms of divine power level, Soren was now a mid-level divine power close to a great divine power, and Siric had been sealed for too long. At present he was at most a low-level divine power close to a mid-level divine power. There was a whole divine power level difference between the two sides. With Soren's divine power of tracking, Siric was almost unnoticed by Soren. It was difficult for Soren to find Siric without seeing Siric with his own eyes. But now that he saw Siric's altar and avatar, it was much easier to track the target. Siric intended to make the water muddy and let Clemvox and Naruto both suffer, and Soren intended to kill him first. As long as Siric was killed, Soren would inevitably be promoted to a great divine power. At that time, there would be no problem in entering the battle between Naruto and Clemvox. Not to mention that the power of Mordor itself was very strong. As long as Soren made a move at the right time, the possibility of winning in the end was very high. After discovering Siric's trace, things became much simpler. For a time the entire south coast entered a special atmosphere. The forces of the outside world thought that Soren was going to attack Naruto in revenge for secretly instructing the demons to attack Mordor City. In fact, the gods all guessed that Naruto was the mastermind who controlled Naruto. At this time, Soren was definitely going to hit Naruto when he was down, and it was also something that they were very happy to see. This time, it could be said that Naruto made the public angry because even the Church of the Storm Lord destroyed a temple of Naruto. They thought that Naruto must be responsible for the plague that spread in the Amazon rainforest. This terrible plague reduced the population of the Amazon rainforest by half, and some tribes were basically destroyed. The environment of the primitive jungle was too easy to breed the plague. Coupled with the secret actions of Naruto's followers, the scope of the plague was very large. The gods only saw the movements on the surface. The elites of the Church of Mordor, including the Nightwalkers, the Arcane Assassins, the Central Administration, the Inquisitors, the Arcane Assassins, and so on, were all handed over to the High Priest and the Chosen. These people secretly went to the Raven Hills in the southern region. With the efficiency of the operation of Mordor, the whole transfer only took about a day. After Soren's body arrived at the south coast, Mordor had secretly gathered more than 1,600 middle-grade professionals, more than 300 high-grade rogues, and more than 100 other high-grade professionals. At the same time, the combat power of the legendary level had reached about 1/3. The time to act was the next night. If the gods were to give Siric an evaluation, there was no doubt that it was very uniform. That was madman. Siric was a madman. His madness made him set up too many enemies, and he was even judged twice by the good and evil gods. It could be said that he was completely alone, although he was very powerful. A narrow-minded, self-centered, and extremely extreme god. Such a god was also different among the gods. No one was willing to cooperate with him. Even the Lady of Night was also hostile to Sirik, thinking that his existence was a great threat. In the dark, some lurking shadows approached the Raven Hills. This was the base camp established by Sirik in a short time. Because there were too many enemies, Sirik's followers did not dare to move in the city. His temples were in the wilderness and most of them were built underground. In the dark corner of this land, there was a special emblem, a skull without a jaw with a black light background. This was Sirik's emblem. Only his followers could find and enter the underground temple. Sirik's kingdom was in the supreme throne, but now it was abandoned. He had been sealed for too long and his kingdom had withered too much. As a supreme evil god, even if he had been sealed for so long, Sirik still had many priesthoods. The core of them were lies, murder, conspiracy, fraud, and illusion. The domains he had were chaos, evil, destruction, illusion, and trickery. Do it. With a cold voice, the shadows in all directions quickly moved forward, and soon a fierce battle broke out. Sirik's followers lurked in the dark. They could access the murdered domain, and they also had amazing stealth abilities. The two sides engaged in a fierce battle in an instant. Not only did Sirik's followers die in large numbers, but Soren's followers also paid a big price. The enemy was very strong. Sirik's domain and priesthoods gave his followers more special abilities. At the same time, in the depths of the underground shrine, the attack from above had alarmed the Chosen. A black figure quickly arrived at the altar in the depths, speaking to a slender man with frightening black eyes and deathly white skin. "My lord." "Not good. We were attacked by the Shadow Church." The man who was absorbing power on the altar suddenly opened his eyes. Sirik frowned and sensed for a moment. Then his face changed greatly. "Shadow Master Soren?" A terrible shadow shrouded him. This was the perception brought by his priesthoods. He still felt that he had fallen into a terrible conspiracy. "Come here." Sirik's face changed a few times, then he said to the Chosen in front of him. The Chosen did not hesitate and quickly came in front of Sirik. At this moment, Sirik suddenly reached out and held the Chosen's head, and then an evil divine power with divinity poured into the Chosen's body. Ah! A shrill scream sounded in the depths of the basement, and soon the Chosen in front of him began to change. A lot of divine power poured into his body, and the Chosen in front of him gradually became Sirik's appearance. A lot of divine power poured into him made him look like a real god. Trickery, domain, deceit, priesthoods. Sirik glanced at the exact same version of himself in front of him, then slowly transformed into the form of a god's chosen one. "You stay here." Sirik looked outside and said to the avatar in front of him, "When the enemy comes in, self-destruct." After that, his figure disappeared into the darkness. Sirik quickly walked out of the temple. Along the way he did not show the power that a true god should have. Instead, he pretended to be a chosen and quickly rushed outside to break out of the encirclement. The cicada shedding its carapace. Facing Soren, he did not have much confidence in winning, so he chose to escape. Chapter 1075. It was true that Sirik was a madman. But he was also a very cunning madman. Otherwise, Soren wouldn't have been able to track down Sirik until now. Sirik, who was in the form of God's chosen, was very cautious. He restrained his power, and even when fighting against the chosen of Soren's church, he only maintained a slight advantage. He wasn't in a hurry to kill his opponent. Instead, he took advantage of the moment to open up the distance between them, and then instantly escaped into the darkness. There were a lot of enemies. Sirik was able to see over 1,000 invaders from the Shadow Church within his field of vision. Although he broke free from the seal and developed his church, Sirik's followers were obviously much weaker than Soren's. After all, Soren had other churches while Sirik was sealed for thousands of years. He had to start from scratch. He endured the pain in his heart and gritted his teeth as he gave up on these followers. Although he couldn't wait to kill Soren, Sirik knew that now wasn't the time. He had to be patient and accumulate strength. In the vast night, Sirik carefully escaped from the encirclement, and then quickly retreated to the north. He couldn't stay in the south any longer. Soren's church had too much influence in the south, and their intelligence network was too extensive. It would be easy for them to find him. However, just as Sirik rushed out of the encirclement, a slender man appeared in his sight. "It's an honor to meet you." Soren's figure emerged from the darkness. He smiled at Sirik's chosen and slightly bowed. "Dark Sun, Your Excellency Sirik." The tracking clergy locked onto the target. If it wasn't for Soren's tracking clergy, perhaps this time Sirik really would have escaped. A little bit of divine light appeared. A powerful pressure came from all directions, and some sort of quintessence energy sealed off the space around them. Sirik's expression immediately became unsightly. That's really a big deal." Sirik's ashen face reverted back to its original appearance. His expression was a little desperate as he said, "So many people actually came. I think I should really feel honored." In the southwest, Vivian and Lillian appeared. In the northeast, the incarnation of the goddess of wealth slowly walked out. In the south, the figure of the goddess of agriculture sat on a chair made of emerald green vines, deep in thought as she stared at Sirik in the distance. In the north, Princess Royal's figure floated in mid-air, her expression seemingly unmoved. In the direction of the sea, the incarnation of the goddess of ocean was holding a trident and watching from afar. It seemed that she had no intention of fighting. Soren smiled but said nothing. 6 mid-level divine powers and above surrounded Sirik. The powerful spatial seal made it impossible for him to escape. As for the possibility of survival, it was very slim. After all, you are the legendary Dark Sunday. Soren didn't care about the sarcastic tone of the other party's voice at all. He calmly said, "I think it's not too much to be careful when dealing with the former Prince of Lies, right?" He was Sirik. He was once the first person among the gods. At his peak, he was more powerful than the Lord of Light and Father of the Oak Tree. He was the legendary Child of Destiny. He rose quickly in the first Avatar crisis and seized the power of the 3 death gods. He also stole the priesthood of Shadow. When Sirik was at his peak, not a single god could stand up to him alone. Even in the end, when he faced judgment, the gods had to join forces to deal with him. No one dared to despise him. Even if Sirik was a madman, he was the most terrible madman in the multiverse. If it weren't for Sirik's own death, there would be no Klemvox, the king of the dead. He would become the real Lord of Death, the absolute king of the lower planes. Even Asmodeus might not be his opponent. At his peak, Sirik was closer to the greater divine power than the current Lord of Light. To some extent, he had become the same existence as Jurgil. Unfortunately, he still courted death in the end. If it weren't for Sirik's desire to become the god of gods, and his madness led to his own destruction, Sirik would definitely be the most favored god of fate. His experience was even more exaggerated than Soren's. Although Soren had quickly reached the level of a mid-level divine power, Sirik had once directly advanced to a great divine power in the Avatar crisis. After advancing to a great divine power, he immediately began to dabble in greater divine powers, wanting to become the god of gods. Although he had been sealed for so long, Soren still didn't dare to despise him. After all, he was the real Child of Destiny. If he gave Sirik a chance, who knew what would happen in the end? If he really seized the power of Naruto and Klemvox, then the direction of history would definitely be problematic. Even if he was trapped in a desperate situation surrounded by gods, Sirik still didn't give up hope. He was looking for opportunities and flaws. But to his great disappointment, although the other gods didn't intend to attack immediately, no one was careless enough to let him escape. This was Sirik. The goddess of agriculture had heard of his name before she was born. He was one of the #1 figures that the gods feared and hated. If Sirik had any weakness, it was that he was too conceited. Basically, Sirik didn't have any allies and his relationship with the other gods was very tense. When he first created the Sirik scripture, he wanted to enslave the other gods. If he didn't fall into madness after reading it, many gods would have been plotted against by him in the end. No one dared to relax their vigilance. Even the goddess of wealth and the goddess of ocean, who didn't intend to attack, were cautious and wary of any possible movements of Sirik. A silver-white streamer appeared. A strange silver-white curved sword appeared in the palm of Soren. This was an artifact that hadn't been completely completed, but it had reached the power of grade 5. After Soren advanced to the great divine power, it would be completed completely. At that time, it would become a powerful artifact above grade 6. Your Excellency Dark Sunday, Soren's figure was surrounded by shadows, and in an instant, he turned into the form of a true god. He slowly said, "Let's settle our grievances. The past of the 3 gods of death should be completely ended here." The power of the ancient god of death, Jurgil, was divided into 3 and became the 3 gods of death. 3 great divine powers, evil existences. During the first Avatar crisis, the three gods of death fell at the same time. Sirik gained most of the power, but because of his own actions, Clemvox took away the priesthood of Mirko. Later, the god of tyranny, Ban, was resurrected. Clemvox entered the underworld and ruled over death. Sirik became the god of murder. A new structure of the three gods of death appeared again. Before the Arcane Empire, Sirik plotted against the god of tyranny to steal his divine power. But he didn't expect that his actions had already angered the gods. He was judged a second time and sealed, and the priesthood of the god of tyranny was taken away by the Dread Lord. Clemvox became the big winner at that time and completely controlled the underworld of death. Now, Soren's identity as the son of slaughter was the continuation of the three gods of death. Sirik still had the power of the god of murder, and Clemvox still represented the ruler of death. This was an inescapable battle of fate. Soren, Clemvox, and Sirik were destined to only have one winner, and this winner would become the true Lord of Death. It seemed that Sirik didn't have the chance to do so. 6 mid-level gods began to approach gradually. They completely surrounded the Prince of Lies from 3 sides: the sea, the land, and the air. This time, Soren did not hold back. He mobilized almost all his allies. Chapter 1076. The earth was shaking. Terrible explosions continued to sound, and the people nearby, whether they were believers of the Shadow Church or the Murder Church, none of them dared to come close. Because this was the battlefield of the gods, any mortal, even legendary professions, could die in an instant if they approached. The powerful power of divinity sealed the space, and more than one breath that made mortals tremble appeared. The fierce battle caused countless cracks to appear on the ground, and the surrounding vines and plants grew wildly. The cold ice and snow fell from time to time, and occasionally, a dazzling golden light flashed like a golden lightning that tore the sky. "I'm not willing." The low roar was like a beast, and blood dripped down his arm. Sirik's expression was full of madness, like a beast trapped in a trap. His whole body was covered with a layer of white frost, and there was already ice around his body. Except for the divine blood that was not frozen, the surrounding vegetation had completely withered. There were fatal wounds on Sirik's back and shoulders. Even with the superior magic, it still could not be healed in a short time. His divine shield had already been breached by the joint forces of the gods. In his somewhat chaotic memories, this scene seemed a little familiar. Soon he recalled that painful time. That was the second time he was judged by the gods. He was expelled and sealed by the gods. The scene at that time was so similar to what he was experiencing now. It's time to end it. Soren's face was as calm as ever, but his palm was slightly trembling. Sirik cut off half of his left palm, and even with the divine power, it would take some time to recover. The enemy was much more difficult to deal with than expected. Although Sirik was now weak to a lesser divine power, Soren had a feeling of fighting against a greater divine power. The power of murder. The power of trickery. The power of illusion. If it were not for the Princess Royal's ability to freeze illusions, the battle would be much more difficult than it was now. But everything was about to end. Sirik's divine force had already been exhausted. Without a divine shield, there was no way he could withstand the attacks of so many intermediate gods. A silver-white stream of light streaked across the sky. Soren became one with the silver blade, instantly unleashing the power of his divine domain of shadow. Sirik waved his razor back in a futile attempt to block Soren's attack, but his depleted divine power was no longer enough to support him. As the silver light cut through his body, Sirik finally fell to the ground with a pale face. Sirik had not broken free from the seal for long enough. Although the church was established, the time was too short. Under the background of the Avatar crisis, Sirik could not accumulate enough divine power to maintain the defense. In the face of the joint attack of the gods, he was even more powerless. The golden blood of divinity sprinkled down. Countless dazzling lights surged out from Sirik's body. Most of them surged into Soren's body, while some of them landed on the others. A row of data appeared before his eyes. God of murder, Sirik has been killed. Extracting target's soul energy. You've gained 75,800,000 slaughter EXP. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've gained 210 divinity. Target has divinity. Extracting target's divinity. You've gained 65 divinity. Seize target's divine domain of murder. Your domain of slaughter has been enhanced. Your divinity of slaughter has been enhanced. Your domain of death has been enhanced. Seize target's divine domain of lie. You've gained domain of lie. Seize target's divine domain of deception. You've gained domain of deception. Seize target's divine domain of illusion. You've gained domain of illusion. Seize target's divine domain of conspiracy. You've gained domain of conspiracy. Seize target's domain of craftiness. Your domain of craftiness has been enhanced. God of murder, Sirik has been killed. Your domain of death has been enhanced. Your domain of death has been enhanced. Compatibility 95%. You've gained domain of conspiracy. You've gained domain of deception. You've gained domain of slaughter. You've successfully seized target's divine domain of murder. An unprecedented amount of divinity surged into Soren's body. This was something that had never happened before. The indescribable compatibility allowed Soren to absorb the power that dissipated after Sirik's death. This power was so similar to his that the degree of fusion was quite astonishing. 210 divinity points. 65 divinity points. This was almost the majority of the power that Sirik had accumulated since he broke free from the seal, and now all of this divinity had surged into Soren's body. This was something that had never happened before when killing any god. No god could let Soren absorb such a large amount of divinity like Sirik. This was because their origins were also the three gods of death, and the degree of fusion of divinity far exceeded that of other gods. Seize target's divine domain successfully. You've gained domain of murder. You've gained a new domain, destruction. You've successfully advanced to great divine power. A part of the divinity was scattered. Although Soren and Sirik's divine domain and divinity had an amazing compatibility, there was still a considerable amount of rejection. That was, Soren belonged to the lawful evil faction, while Sirik belonged to the chaotic evil faction. There was no way to merge with this divinity. Sirik's divinity with the power of chaos was scattered to the others. Some of it was absorbed by the gods who came to help, and some flew to the mortals' bodies. At this moment, a surge of divinity gushed out from Soren's body. The gods present couldn't help but be surprised when they saw it, and then smiled and nodded to express their congratulations. He had advanced to a great divine power. After seizing Sirik's divinity, Soren directly advanced to a great divine power, and his divinity value had reached a very shocking level. At present, Soren's divinity value was 715 points, and his shard of divinity was 350 points. Basically, he was almost the same as the old great divine powers, and his divinity value might even be a little higher. Now, most of the power of the three gods of death had been seized by Soren, and the only part left was Klemvox's. As the former king of the dead, Klemvox's divinity was obviously stronger than Sirik's. If he succeeded in killing him, then Soren might be stronger than the ancient god of death, Jurgil at his peak. After all, there was still Naruto from another world that he needed to deal with. Chapter 1077. As the power of divinity was taken away, Sirik's body gradually turned into golden light spots and dissipated. The bodies of the gods were all in the form of pure energy, so there would be corpses left behind after killing powerful gods. Soren had destroyed Sirik's soul, and with the complete death of Sirik on many dark underground altars in the material plane, the statues representing Sirik instantly lost their brilliance, and then cracks appeared one after another, and finally the whole statue completely collapsed. If a god fell, these statues would automatically be destroyed, and at that time, the believers would know that the god they believed in was finished. My lord. The figure of the high priest appeared on the edge of the battlefield. She whispered to Soren, the church has lost a lot of believers and the giant has also died. Sirik's assassin was very difficult to deal with. The new legendary warrior of Mordor, the giant, was attacked from behind by the enemy when he was fighting against a divine assassin. Although the giant did not die on the spot, the result was extremely tragic. The giant died of exhaustion after fighting against 3 enemies. The gods could quickly create a group of legendary professions. Although these people lost their higher potential in the end, the improvement in combat power in a short period of time was obvious. Soren merged with the powerful power in his body. He felt the new priesthood and then said, I know. Bring his body back to Mordor. Inform the temple to prepare for the resurrection ceremony. Finally he had a great divine power. Soren lifted the state of God's descent, bowed slightly to express his gratitude to the other gods who helped him, and then directly returned to Mordor. All the gods present were important allies. No matter what they needed, they had to wait until Soren obtained the position of the Lord of Death. The Shadow Church paid a huge price this time. There were 7 archbishops who died, and there were about a dozen other legendary professions. The Great Divine Power was a benchmark. In the context of the Avatar Crisis, the Great Divine Power also represented one thing, that was, Soren could finally use the resurrection spell. During the period of the Avatar Crisis, it was relatively easy for the gods to resurrect a person. Although it consumed a lot of power, it was still within the acceptable range. Even the weak gods could do it. But it was completely different during the Avatar Crisis. If you wanted to resurrect a person, only the existence of a great divine power could try. Princess Royal directly returned to Arendelle. The goddess of wealth left a message for Soren and left as well. The goddess of ocean did not join the battle. She just nodded and merged into the waves. The goddess of agriculture came to Soren's side to take a look, shook her head and sighed, "Cyric has finally fallen. Perhaps this is a good thing for the gods." The battle ended. Cyric's destruction was no surprise, and after Soren's alliance with so many gods, it was impossible for anything else to go wrong. One competitor had been eliminated. However, Soren also had a lot of things to do. Naruto was about to make his move, but Soren had one more important thing to do: expand his own temple. Soren had reached the level of a great divine power, so it was urgent to build a giant god temple in Motor City. A complete giant god temple consisted of many parts. First, there was a magnificent main temple, and then there were 2 or 3 subordinate temples. A complete giant god temple was equivalent to the headquarters of a divine system. The believers of the entire divine system could pray here. At the same time, the giant god temple was also a direct link to the divine kingdom. The giant god temple was the limit of what could be built in the material plane. The next day, many legendary professions, including the giants, were sent to the temple in Motor City. The grand prayer ceremony was presided over by the high priest, and Soren came to the center of the temple in the form of a god. A huge amount of faith power was gathered. Even with the interference of the Avatar Crisis, Soren still condensed a majestic divine power after advancing to the level of a great divine power. The resurrection ceremony consisted of 2 parts. If the body was intact, then it could be solved with only a greater resurrection spell. During the Avatar Crisis, ordinary resurrection spells were ineffective. Only after the end of the Avatar Crisis could ordinary resurrection spells resurrect targets who died within 12 hours, and the bodies must be intact. However, Soren had the divine title of Death, after all, so it was easy for the resurrection spell to recall the part of the soul. Almost none of the bodies in front of him were intact. In the fierce struggle between the 2 divine churches, almost all the believers who died in the battle had incomplete bodies. In this case, only Soren could resurrect them. Greater limb regeneration. With the emergence of the golden light, Soren transformed into the form of a god. First, he cast a legendary greater limb regeneration spell. This was the most advanced regeneration spell. Even the head could be repaired and grown back, but if there was no soul, many times the caster would become a vegetable. The incomplete body of the giant kept regenerating. It looked like a troll who had a part of its head cut off. It quickly recovered to the most basic human structure, but the lost hair didn't recover. To cast greater limb regeneration, one must have enough knowledge of the human body. In fact, this was a legendary necromancy spell. The dead in front of him kept regenerating, and their bodies became complete again. However, they did not resurrect, they were still dead. Greater resurrection. The dazzling golden light suddenly rose. When Soren completed this super difficult divine spell, countless low chants sounded. Then the golden light rose in the center of the temple. With the convergence of the power of death, transparent souls passed through the space crack in the center of the temple and were directly summoned by Soren from the river Styx. All resurrection spells were related to the god of death. It was difficult to succeed without the consent of the god of death. Even in the period outside of the Avatar Crisis, the resurrection spells of the gods were actually dealing with the god of death. The souls from the river Styx were injected into the body. A burst of vitality was awakened, and the believers who had died in front of him gradually opened their eyes. Their expressions were a little dazed, and it seemed that their consciousness was not very clear. This was the drawback of the resurrection spell. Any soul would come into contact with the river Styx after death. The earlier the resurrection, the less contact with the river Styx. But even so, they would lose part of their memory. The number of times a person could be resurrected was limited. The power of the river Styx could not be underestimated. If a person was resurrected too many times, even the gods could not separate them from the river Styx. However, these people in front of him were obviously not one of them. Soren successfully cast the resurrection spell and resurrected all the legendary professions who died in this battle. However, the price of doing so was that his divine power was greatly consumed, and the golden light over the temple became very dim for a while. Resurrection. It was never a cheap spell. Chapter 1078. In the Land of Bones. Countless undead wandered in this wilderness. This was originally an ancient battlefield of the Arcane Empire. Later, due to the fall of the floating city, it formed a strong energy radiation. The resurrected undead here were more dangerous than in other places because their bodies were shrouded in a negative energy field. Any effective attack could drain the enemy's attribute value. This was a forbidden zone for the living. There were no living beings in sight. Occasionally there would be some necromancers shuttling back and forth. They were busy transporting strange materials from the lower planes, produced in the region between the spirit realm and the underworld. A huge altar stood in the middle of the land. This altar covered a large area. It looked like a white bone fortress. Around the altar were 7 strange towers. They looked a bit like obelisks, but the top of the obelisks were burning with blue flames. No creature dared to approach the obelisks. Even the liches kept a distance. This was because this was a soul-summoning tower, which was also a soul-locking tower. Countless wraiths wandered around the top of the obelisks, but they could not break free. Countless wraiths were released from the blue flames. They kept rushing outside and roaring, but in the end they hit an invisible energy field. Some of them disappeared and were absorbed by the soul-summoning tower. The other part was bounced back into the tower. "My lord." A high-grade necromancer priest came to the altar and said respectfully, "The other soul-summoning towers have been completed. We can begin the ceremony." Along with the appearance of a dark figure, a horrible existence descended on the top of the altar. Naruto, a god from another world, took nearly 1,000 years to take root here and steal the power of the death god system. The god of death, Hell, was a famous and notorious deity. His face was dry and horrible. He was like a skeleton with rusty red skin, thick dark green hair, and a black cloak. His eyes, teeth, and nails were soaked in drugs. His black staff, Reaper, could form a blade of light in the shape of a giant sickle on the tip of the staff. It could instantly kill any mortal when it touched it. This artifact was like the Orcus staff but stronger. Naruto was the real god of death. He could kill any mortal at will. God of death, the enemy of kindness, the abomination of life, the messenger of darkness, the king of gloom, and the reaper of flesh. In the long history, the god of death, Nero, had too many titles. He was a god of the neutral evil camp. At his peak he was a great divine power. Although he had weakened to a mid-level divine power after coming to this world, he could not be measured by the standard of an ordinary mid-level divine power. This god of death also wanted to be as powerful as the ancient god of death, Jurgel. Hell's priesthood was death, darkness, murder, and the underworld. Was death, evil, and craftiness. Basically, any god who had the craftiness domain could not be underestimated. Just look at those gods who had the craftiness domain. The Queen of Spiders, Lolth, the god of murder, Sirik, the goddess of magic, Mistra, and the Lady of the Night, Shar. Basically, gods who had the craftiness domain were very dangerous. Naruto's body came. With his appearance, countless undead spirits fell silent. Then rows of undead spirits knelt down as if they were worshipping their master. A strong aura of death emerged. Since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, countless people had died in the material plane. The disaster of the undead had intensified this process, causing countless mortals to die in the disaster. I am the Reaper of Life. I am the Master of Death. Naruto stepped into the center of the altar with a huge black scythe in his hand. With his footsteps, countless undead emerged from the ground and then flew wildly to the surrounding obelisks. The huge power of death surged. Almost at the moment when Naruto started the ritual, countless undead in the material plane sensed it. The remaining power of the long sleep domain also dissipated. Many hazy wandering souls quickly appeared, and mortals could see them with the naked eye. This situation only appeared when one was close to the underworld. Now, at the same time as Naruto's promotion, the entire material plane was disturbed. In a short time, the power of the law was eroded by death, making the material plane become like the spiritual world. Only in the spiritual world could there be so many wandering souls. In an instant, all the gods sensed it, and the ones who sensed it the most were the gods related to death. Oh! An angry roar came from a distant direction, followed by a golden light across the sky. The power of the long sleep domain suddenly skyrocketed, and the figures of many ghosts became hazy again. Naruto, life-hater. Clemvox's golden figure appeared in the sky, and he angrily said to Naruto, "You can't succeed. I am the king of the undead." Altars rose in the material plane. Naruto was not surprised by Clemvox's appearance. He had been preparing for this for a long time. "Weak Clemvox. You don't deserve to be in charge of death." Naruto's lips curled into a sarcastic smile, and then with a wave of his hand, more than 10 powerful undead auras appeared in the surroundings. The undead, Owo. The Emperor of the Undead, Shane the Ninth. The Demigod Lich, Sarzastan. The Skeleton King, Wadaland. Powerful undead appeared in the surroundings. There were 5 or 6 famous undead in the multiverse. Even if the others were not famous, they were still high-grade legendary undead. These were all Clemvox's enemies. For a long time, Clemvox's suppression of the undead made many undead kings hate his existence. At this moment, there was a slight change in the sky. Then a huge spatial door was opened, and the emblem representing the Githyanki's appeared in front of them. Another ally of Naruto had arrived. The evil ancient Lich Empress, the ruler of the Githyankis, Lich Empress Velakis appeared in the field of vision. This terrible brain-eating lich did not completely come to the material plane. She was full of suspicion and could not imagine anyone. Even if she had an alliance with Naruto, she still held back. Thousands of eternal sleepers appeared at the edge of the land of bones. They belonged to the Church of Clemvox. Countless believers who lost their loved ones in the disaster of the undead gathered together. They were full of anger and hatred. With the power given by Clemvox, they attacked the countless undead in front of them. This was a battle between the living and the dead. Hatred made their faith firmer, and hatred also made them fearless in the face of countless undead. The muffled prayers continued. Naruto stood on the altar and absorbed the power of the obelisk. He did not seem to care much about the existence of Clemvox. There were other undead kings guarding the periphery of the altar, and this promotion ceremony was not afraid of other people's interference because Naruto's strength was close to the great divine power. Now all he had to do was to integrate the death power of the material plane. If he succeeded, he would change the characteristics of the material plane and make this plane more suitable for his rule. Chapter 1079. Clemvox's figure was stopped. Although he was a god with great divine power, under the background of the Avatar crisis, Clemvox had lost the power of a true god. All the gods were suppressed. Even Clemvox could only fight in the form of a saint. That was to say, he was now only a saint with a profession level of more than 40. If not, he would not have been seriously injured by Naruto's sneak attack for a while. Many undead kings surrounded Clemvox's figure. In the face of so many powerful liches and undead kings, even Clemvox was not easy to get away, not to mention that there was a Githyanki Lich Queen in the sky. Clemvox was obviously at a disadvantage. And it seemed to be a very serious disadvantage because he couldn't even force Naruto to make a move. However, after all, Clemvox was the old king of the dead. When Clemvox's figure was stopped by many undead kings, a low voice suddenly came from the southwest. "Enough. You undead have caused countless disasters in the material plane. Now it's time for you to go back." In the distant sky, a male human with wounds and scars all over his body appeared. When he walked with great difficulty, it could be seen that his feet were lame, and his hands were seriously injured. His thin and short body was only wrapped in a loincloth. Although his head was slightly bald, he was bald, but there was always a comforting, gentle smile on his unattractive face. His body with thick body hair was crisscrossed with various scars, bleeding wounds, burning scars, and marks left by various kinds of torture. But even so, a powerful force shrouded the edge of the battlefield. Some kind of domain was comforting the living while suppressing the brutality of the undead. Ilmet, god of suffering. This mid-level divine power and god of the lawful good alignment seemed to be persuaded by Clemvox. He joined the battle and stood on the side of the living. The gods were all spying on them. No one dared to easily get involved in the battle of the king of the dead. Perhaps only the gods of the lawful good camp could be easily persuaded by Clemvox to deal with Naruto. After all, Naruto's behavior had seriously angered these lawful good gods. Ilmut was a mid-tier god. He was the weeping god and the broken god. His church comforted and took in the disabled, the oppressed, the poor, slaves, serfs, and so on. It had a wide range of beliefs among the lower class of the material plane. Ilmater was a kind-hearted, docile, quiet, and peaceful god. He was willing to bear the suffering of the whole world. However, although the weeping god's personality was very gentle, he would also show an extremely violent and cruel side when he was angry. He was extremely concerned about all the children and young lives in the world, and he struck down those who dared to harm those he protected. The undead calamity killed many people. Among them, the weak children were even more difficult to survive. Ilmut's anger made his pupils shine with golden light, and it looked like a sharp sword directly aimed at Naruto. This deity wasn't very powerful. She was not a fighting god, but the Church of Ilmater had many loyal followers all over the continent. In this cruel and realistic world, many victims, the sick and the poor, relied on the Church of Ilmut to survive. People in many areas respected the Church of the Weeping God, and his priests often received a lot of generous help when they practiced medicine everywhere for free. Groups of monks appeared on the edge of the battlefield. They were the legendary Broken, the monk group of Ilmut, and one of the most powerful monk groups in the material plane. These powerful monks were good at enduring pain and turning pain and suffering into strength. They could be part-time priests, and they could also advance to secret believers, holy warriors, divine power believers, divine power seekers, and saints without being punished by leaving their profession. At the same time, because of the power of Ilmut, these monks also had the ability to heal. They could use the gift of healing as well as a small number of healing divine spells. This suffering god paid attention to spirituality, and his church had a group of monks who gave up their physical bodies in pursuit. The destroyer was like a sharp knife that pierced into the hearts of countless undead. At the same time, the undead lords under the control of Ilmut, Kalemver, and the undead lords under Naruto's control became nervous. However, Naruto himself stood on the altar without the slightest movement. He just continued to absorb the death power of this world and said to the void, "It's time to fulfill your promise. When I take over the death god system, you can get more rewards." Well, for a moment, the other gods were surprised because they did not feel the existence of other people. Hee hee. A sudden laughter echoed on the earth, and then a blood-red light tore the sky. In the sky above countless undead, a door to the Bator Inferno opened. Devil? Clemvox's frightened and angry voice sounded, roaring, "As the god of death, you actually colluded with the devil. This is an unforgivable betrayal of the gods." The god of death guarded the underworld and the river Styx. Whether it was devils or demons, they all wanted to steal souls from the river Styx. For a long time, the god of death had been secretly competing with the soul stealers, and almost all the soul stealers were backed by the big shots of the lower planes. Abyss fiends walked out of the portal one by one. Leading them was the Devil Duke of the first level of the Bator Inferno, Bayer. Behind him, a Devil Duke with a snake-like body appeared. He was the Devil Duke of the third level, Mammon. Naruto had indeed colluded with the devil. In order to seize Clemvox's power, he had even betrayed the underworld. This was a betrayal of the gods' alliance, because the god of death's most important duty was to protect these souls and prevent them from being stolen by the demons and devils of the lower planes. Countless devil elites appeared in the sky. These were the elite troops from the Abyss Blood War. Bayer was the commander of the Blood War, and the troops he could mobilize far surpassed the other devil dukes. The situation of the battle was instantly reversed. With the appearance of the devil army, neither Clemvox's church nor Ilmater's church had any chance of victory. It was impossible for a mortal army to fight against the Blood War. Weak and shameful Clemvox. The god of death is the master of death. He is not the servant of the other gods. Naruto had a mocking smile on his face. "Look at how pitiful you are. As the ruler of the underworld, you have fallen to such a state." Countless devils attacked from the sky. In an instant, Clemvox's church suffered heavy losses. To be able to persuade the Blood War to join the battle, there was no doubt that Naruto had paid a sufficient price. The only possibility was the river Styx. He had betrayed the river Styx, allowing the devil's tentacles to infiltrate the river Styx. Chapter 1080. Is Naruto crazy? In the distant city of Motor, Soren, who was secretly watching all of this, was also shocked. Naruto actually used the river Styx as a bargaining chip to persuade the demon's main forces in the Abyss Blood War. Asmodeus must be behind this. This is simply a betrayal of the gods' covenant. A trace of anger appeared on Soren's face and he murmured, "Is he really not afraid of completely angering Jianghu?" This was a very ancient covenant. It had existed since the time of the ancient god of death, Jianghu. When the first batch of creatures appeared in the world, their souls were transported to the underworld by the river Styx after they died. Unless it was a particularly important believer, most of the gods, whether good or evil, would eventually receive their souls from the underworld to the kingdom of God. The task of the oracles from the other world was to be responsible for the exchange of souls with the servants of death, and the servants of death's task was to protect the river Styx and souls to prevent them from being taken by the soul stealers from the lower plane. This was a battle that had lasted for countless years. The demons coveted souls, resulting in the birth of many soul stealers every year. They constantly tried to take souls from the mainstream and tributaries of the river Styx, and at the same time guarded against the powerful servants of death. Bator Inferno and the Abyss both had lords who coveted the wealth of the river Styx. The gods of death were the first line of defense against them. Every god of death had to deal with the soul stealers, and the souls themselves were the wealth of the gods of death. Even the three gods of death during the crazy period did not dare to betray this ancient covenant. But now it seemed that Naruto had obviously abandoned part of the benefits of the river Styx, and let the demon's tentacles penetrate into the river Styx. This was a very terrible thing. If the demons had an endless supply of souls, then they would continue to evolve and give birth to a large number of powerful senior demons. At the same time, a large number of souls would be desecrated, resulting in the Bator Inferno having an extremely terrifying number of soldiers. "We can't wait anymore." Soren suddenly stood up and said, "Activate the arcane tower. Activate the Mies nucleus. Prepare the super magical pulse cannon. Activate the diamond golem army. Prepare to launch a super long-range energy attack on the devil army." The demons had always been the kind of people who would not act unless they saw a rabbit. They would not act unless they got the benefits. Naruto had obviously fallen a part of the Styx into the hands of the demons. It was impossible for Clemvox's church to defeat the Devil Legion. These were the main forces of the Abyss Bloody War. How could mortals fight against the powerful legendary demons? On the battlefield, a terrible massacre was taking place. Although the undead were extremely powerful, they were still inferior to the terrifying Blood War Legion. Clemvox's church suffered heavy losses in an instant. Countless mortal believers fell under the butcher knives of the devil elites. Even the powerful broken monks could only resist the devil's attack. Among the enemies, there were many greater devils, among which there were thousands of abyss fiends. A cruel smile appeared on the corner of Nero's mouth. He loved the flowers that bloomed at the end of life, and he thought they were the most beautiful things. Batches of mortals were being slaughtered. Clemvox's power was constantly weakening, while his power was constantly increasing. Everything seemed to be a foregone conclusion. Clemvox had no chance to turn the tables. But, just when Naruto thought he had won, a dazzling light suddenly appeared in the distant sky. It was like a sun rising. Countless devils had a look of horror on their faces. Then, as if they had seen an extremely terrible existence, they fled frantically toward the blood-red portal one after another. The light shrouded the earth. The golden sun was suspended in mid-air, and a terrifying divine power shrouded the earth. Countless undead melted like snow under this light. Even the vengeful spirits at the top of the obelisk quieted down, all of them hiding in the blue soul fire. "Life hater, Naruto." A deep voice sounded from the golden sun in front of him. The dazzling figure of the god of light appeared. Behind him was not the sun, but the Seven Hills Paradise, that shone brightly. Finally he could not stand it anymore. The figure of the god of light shone brightly like the sun god in ancient times, illuminating all the land in front of him, leaving no place for the darkness to hide. Holding the scepter in his hand, he waved it toward Naruto's figure. Powerful divine power fell from the sky, and countless low prayers and chants sounded. Behind the god of light, countless angels on the Seven Hills Paradise began to chant together. The dazzling holy light shrouded everything as if to purify all evil. "Naruto, you should pay for all your evil deeds." Countless voices echoed. Angels of holy light, mastiff-head angels, trumpeter angels, golden-winged lions, seraphs, on the layers of Hill's paradise, countless angels of the Yasong god clan chanted together. With a blow from the god of light, the whole world was shrouded in the power of holy light. Countless undead and demons were set ablaze and directly turned into ashes in the light. A trace of horror finally appeared on Naruto's face. He waved the black scythe of the god of death toward the sky with all his might, but the next moment, his entire figure was sent flying backward. The altar under his feet instantly cracked and quickly collapsed in the fire. Kaboom! The obelisks around his majesty fell one after another. The god of light's full blow destroyed the entire ceremony on the spot. What terrifying power! Soren could not help but swallow and murmured, "No wonder he is the existence closest to a greater divine power." Under the sky, Naruto's body had become broken. His withered face was burned by the holy light, and his whole body was emitting black fog. Countless souls rushed out of his cloak. The moment these souls came into contact with the holy light, some of them screamed and turned into ashes, while others quickly sublimated and turned into hazy white figures. They cheered and jumped, and the darkness on their bodies faded away. Then these souls emitted a faint light and rose into the sky. One by one, they swarmed into the mountain paradise behind the god of light. The devil's figure had dissipated. In the sky, the god of light frowned and looked at the gradually disappearing blood-red crack. It was as if he felt another gaze from across the plain watching him. This powerful existence was not afraid at all. He faced the gaze until it dissipated. Then he turned to look at Clemvox and disappeared into the sky. He did not kill Naruto, because this battle would determine the ownership of the god of death, and the power of death was completely opposite to his. The god of light left. With just one blow, he severely injured Naruto and took away the countless souls that Naruto had collected for a long time. The evil in these souls were purified, and the good ones were taken into the Seven Hills Paradise. Chapter 1081. Innumerable souls flew out. These were the mortals who had died since the outbreak of the undead disaster. It was hard to say how many there were, but there were definitely tens of millions of them. Such a huge number could no longer be counted. The god of light took away most of the good souls, and the evil souls were judged. However, there was a limit. Even gods would not easily destroy souls. In addition to these souls, there were more of the gray souls of ordinary people. These people had no obvious good and evil. They had done good and bad things in their lives, and this kind of people was often the most common in the mortal world. These gray souls gathered together, and the number was shocking. They turned gray under the light of the god of light, and then one by one escaped into the ground. There was also the Styx River in the material plane. But mortals could not see it, because the Styx River was in the deepest part of the material plane. It was a huge whirlpool that directly sucked in souls and brought them to other planes. Under normal circumstances, when ordinary people died and were buried in the ground, their souls would be swept into the Styx River, and then through the spiritual world to the underworld. These souls that were imprisoned by Naruto were free, and the price was that Naruto's strength rapidly decreased. Soon, his aura became similar to Clemvox but more or less stronger. As early as the god of light appeared, the Lich Queen of the Githyanki had run away. This ancient and evil existence was so careful. It was said that in order to prevent her position from being shaken, she would suck the brains of many Githyanki who were above level 11. This Lich Queen had existed for a long time. It could even be traced back to the history of the spirit-sucking empire. For a monster to be able to live for so long, her ability to take advantage of the situation was quite amazing. When she saw that the god of light was involved in this battle, she immediately abandoned Naruto and fled back to the astral world. The astral world was boundless and even the gods could not find her. Motor City. When the god of light appeared, Soren's expression suddenly relaxed, and he immediately said, "Temporarily stop the long-range attack of the Arcane Tower. Gloria. You take over the authority of the Arcane Tower, and I will go to the Land of Bones personally." Gloria's figure appeared. There was a hint of worry on her face, but when she saw Soren's determined expression, she could only bite her lips and nod. After all, this was a battle between greater divine powers. It was impossible to say that they weren't worried about Soren, because no one had absolute confidence. Come back alive. Fallen Witch's figure also appeared on top of the tower. She stared at Soren with an expressionless face, then suddenly stepped forward and hugged him fiercely. Regarding this, Gloria did not seem to change at all. It seemed that she vaguely knew something. I'll wait for your return. Gloria stood on the astrology platform and gently stroked her belly as if she was trying to convey something to Soren. Soren nodded and smiled. Don't worry. I never do anything that I'm not completely sure about. 2 rays of light appeared. Brother? Brother. Vivian's and Lillian's figures appeared, and the 2 little faces had determined expressions. We'll go with you. Soren did not hesitate at this moment and nodded. Okay. The 2 little girls' voices were unquestionable, and Soren knew what to do at this time. Outside the arcane tower, little sparkling snowflakes appeared, and Princess Royal's figure quietly appeared. She glanced at the several women in front of her and frowned slightly. Then she said, "Let's go. The opportunity will be gone in the blink of an eye." A hazy figure appeared. Fortunately, I didn't disappoint you. The goddess of agriculture lifted her long hair slightly and glanced at Soren, then said, "What happens next will depend on you. The next battle." Other than Princess Royal, who could fight alongside Soren, the other goddesses could only cheer for Soren at most. Whether it was the goddess of agriculture or the goddess of wealth, it was impossible for them to help him fight against Naruto and Klemvox. The goddess of ocean was also completely impossible. She was unwilling to fight against Cyric the last time. Thinking of this, Soren could not help but turn his gaze to Princess Royal. Although the Princess Royal was often cold and indifferent, he did not expect that in this fateful battle, she was the only one who was willing to fight side by side with Soren. The goddesses in this world would flock to him when there were benefits, but when it came to life and death, there were not many who could be relied on. Their relationship with Soren could only be one of mutual benefit. If he really thought that he could subdue these goddesses by sleeping with them, he would have died a long time ago. There were many goddesses who had a good relationship with Soren, but looking at the goddesses who were here today, he knew that these goddesses were unreliable. Goddess of magic, goddess of wealth, fiery lady, goddess of joy. None of the goddesses who had some relationship with him in the past could be seen today. However, just as Soren was about to teleport away, an absolutely unexpected person appeared. It was a very sudden appearance. It was a gorgeous woman wearing a dark green dress and a veil on her face. No one knew when she appeared outside the arcane tower, but there was a faint smile on her lips. When Soren looked at her, she suddenly smiled playfully and said, "Surprised by my arrival?" The others present were shocked, and at the same time, they looked as if they were facing a great enemy. I really didn't expect it. Soren felt that this face was very familiar. It only took a moment for him to remember the other party's identity. He smiled bitterly and said, "I'm really surprised. Lady Calamity. The goddess of misfortune, Ben Saba. A goddess that Soren would never have expected to appear here. I'm just here to give you my blessings." The female incarnation of the goddess of misfortune slowly walked in front of Soren, then kissed him on the cheek and whispered, "Your enemies will be shrouded in misfortune," a goddess that no one would have expected. Now she was betting on Soren, and it seemed like she was betting a lot. Note, curse of misfortune. What? Soren was puzzled. Lady Calamity smiled and glanced at Princess Royal with a disdainful expression. Then she said, "After all, we are all in the abyss, aren't we? Someone outside of fate. The new child of fate." The beautiful figure chuckled. Then she slowly disappeared. This evil goddess had a bad reputation. It was said that she was narrow-minded and vengeful. She was extremely jealous of her sister, the goddess of fortune. The goddess of fortune was loved by everyone, but she was very afraid of her. Lady Calamity had a special divine power. She had the power of fate, opportunity, and craftiness. She could bless others to avoid misfortune, and she could also curse some people to bring misfortune to them. This was also useful for gods, although the effect was far less than when it was used on mortals. Lady Calamity's figure disappeared. Soren didn't know if this was a good thing or a bad thing. If the goddess of fortune didn't choose to help Naruto and Klemvox because of her, then this was definitely a big advantage for him. Chapter 1082. The twin of destiny was unpredictable. They were outside of the circle of the gods. Apart from things related to fate, they were only interested in the struggle between each other. Whether it was the Lady of Misfortune or the Goddess of Fortune. Since the disaster of Dawn, they had drifted away from the gods and were unwilling to get close to any gods. However, no one could ignore their existence. Soren was now very confused, but he did not hesitate. Since the Lady of Misfortune said that his enemies would be shrouded in misfortune, then this matter must be true. The power of the Twin of Destiny was almost the same. With her support, even if Soren's enemies were not shrouded in misfortune, Soren himself would not be unlucky. The greatest ability of this goddess was to keep people away from misfortune and always keep their luck above average. In the Land of Bones, the final battle had already broken out. Countless skeletons piled up into a mountain. As Naruto's scepter fell, thousands of skeleton warriors climbed up in the blink of an eye. The altar had been destroyed, but there were still countless skeletons on the battlefield, especially the corpses of the senior demons. Naruto had even summoned some powerful undead creatures. Although Naruto was suppressed by the God of Light and was at a disadvantage after all, his overall strength was still there. The disaster of the undead was planned by him, and after the underworld was seized by him, he gained the power of the death god system. Clemvox's time as a god was not as long as Naruto's. When he was a mortal, he was only a warrior. His combat power was not at the top among the great divine powers. A fierce battle broke out. Clemvox waved the touch of destiny, and rushed to Naruto in front of him. This was a divine heavy sword, and Clemvox was wearing a set of strange silver-white chain mail. Kiki. In the face of Clemvox's attack, Naruto did not have any fear and directly waved his light blade. Naruto was a real combat god of death. His main profession was Necromancer level 15, Priest level 20, Rogue level 15, which was a standard profession that could cast spells and fight in close combat. Naruto's attribute template was all attribute mastery. All of his attributes were above 25 points. His agility, wisdom, and intelligence were all above 35 points. To put it simply, this was a god that basically had no weaknesses. Unless it was suppressed by someone like the God of Light who was close to a great existence, it would be able to win against any other god. The God of Light had severely injured him. But for some reason the God of Light did not decide to kill Naruto. Instead he chose to release these souls and leave. This was also a chance for Naruto. It could even be said to be his last chance. Because as long as he killed Clemvox, he could still be promoted to a great divine power, and no other gods could compete with him for the position of the God of Death. In this way, even if he met the God of Light again in the future, Naruto would have no fear. The God of Light's biggest mistake was not to kill him together with Clemvox. At least that was what Naruto thought. And now this mistake would give him a great opportunity. The God of Suffering was not a combat god, and Clemvox's strength was not as good as his. As long as he could find a way to kill Clemvox and stabilize the position of the God of Death, then no god could shake Naruto's position. As for the matters after the Avatar crisis, when the gods returned to the God's kingdom, everyone could sit down and talk about it slowly. The power of death could not be inherited easily. Looking at the ability of the whole material plane, there were only a few who could inherit the power of death, and in Naruto's view only he and Clemvox could do it. The ancient god of death, Jianghu, was basically not in charge anymore. Although Naruto had made a big mistake, Clemvox had also failed in his duty. The gods were not willing to get involved in this battle. The God of Light did not kill Naruto on the one hand to preserve his strength and on the other hand to let them fight it out. Long sleep, field. Compared with Clemvox, who was a warrior god, Naruto was much stronger in his spellcasting ability. In desperation he could only open the long sleep field. Otherwise, Naruto could resurrect the dead indefinitely because he had more divine power and countless divine spells. Divine Aura. Naruto held the black staff and knocked it heavily on the ground. In an instant, an invisible divine power spread to a range of 17 kilometers. This was a more powerful ability than Aura. Naruto directly opened the divine aura that integrated many fields, and this ability was often only mastered by gods who had been sealed for a long time. Under the effect of this divine aura, Clemvox's long sleep field was directly ineffective, and the spells cast by his chosen to dispel the dead, dominate the dead, and so on were all ineffective. The confrontation between the two gods of death directly offset most of the additional death abilities. God's Descent. Regional Divine Shockwave. Naruto in front of him used the rogue spellcasting ability, and Clemvox could not help but be angry. He directly entered the state of God's Descent, and a regional divine shockwave opened a passage directly in front of Naruto. Clemvox firmly believed that as a warrior, he could suppress Naruto as long as he was close. Naruto made a disdainful smile, and suddenly stretched out his pale finger bones. Countless black silk threads flew out and rushed to the chosen behind Clemvox. Regional Touch of Death. Clemvox was immune to all instant death spells, but his believers could not do this. When Naruto completed the spell in an instant, a large number of Clemvox's believers fell down immediately. Many of them turned into skeletons in an instant, and their souls were controlled by Naruto's evil power. In contrast, Naruto's advantage was too great. Because he was the life hater, most of Naruto's believers were undead, and the rest were not undead or half undead. Naruto could use the big skills of death without any scruples, but Clemvox absolutely could not. Dang! A dull loud sound echoed in the middle of the battlefield. Clemvox finally rushed in front of Naruto and forced Naruto back a few steps with just one blow. But Naruto did not care. He waved his light energy blade while completing another evil spell. Life Drain. A strange black line flew out from Naruto's cloak, and then these black lines connected to everyone regardless of friend or foe. Whether it was Naruto's believers or Clemvox's believers, everyone in the vicinity was connected, and the vitality of all these people began to be absorbed by Naruto. Clemvox's strength was really strong. Just a frontal attack injured Naruto, but the injury recovered in a flash and the others nearby were pale. Whether it was the undead or the living. Naruto's terrible specialization in necromancy allowed him to absorb vitality regardless of friend or foe. This evil ability made him almost invincible. Legendary Dispel Magic. Clemvox was angry but he did not lose his mind. He immediately used the legendary Dispel Magic, but it failed directly. Naruto's casting level was about 35, and the casting level of necromancy spells was above 40. Some necromancy spells were blessed by the domain, and the casting level could reach about 45. That was to say, even Soren could not dispel it, let alone Clemvox, who was a warrior god before becoming a god. Naruto was not afraid. The terrifying black light would automatically lock onto the target nearby, and when the target died, it would automatically switch positions. Not only were there Kalemver's believers nearby, but there were also a large number of undead and necromancers who had been resurrected in hell. He did not even activate his divine shield, and he was completely focused on facing Kalemver's ferocious attacks head-on. Chapter 1083. Naruto must have cheated. Outside the battlefield, Soren watched all this and said with a stunned expression, "Fortunately, Clemvox took the lead first. What a strange ability. There was no way to suppress this ability at all. Unless all the people near Naruto were killed, all the people below the level of gods would have their life sucked. Every time Clemvox attacked Naruto, a person nearby would fall. It might be the undead who served Naruto, or it might be Clemvox's believers. After a short confrontation, the morale of Clemvox's believers plummeted. Even the god of suffering restrained his believers from approaching. Although he was kind, he was not stupid. In this situation, the believers would die if they approached. Hatred made Clemvox have no intention of stopping at all. The Avatar crisis had greatly reduced the power of the gods. It was impossible for Kalemver to kill Naruto in one fell swoop. Under such circumstances, his believers had suffered great casualties. These believers had basically died at the hands of Kalemver. Hee. As expected, Naruto started a psychological attack and mocked, "Weak Clemvox. I didn't expect you to have such a fierce side. I'm really impressed. Look around. These believers who served you all died under your attack. The one who died just now was your god's chosen one, right?" More than a dozen of Clemvox's believers had fallen, among which there was no lack of legendary masters. Oh. Clemvox roared like a trapped beast and roared, "These people all died because of you. You should pay the price for all this." Finally, he could not bear the death of his believers and said in a deep voice, "All of you step back." The morale of Clemvox's believers was low. Hearing this, they hesitated a little and began to retreat. In this case they had no choice. The strange black silk stayed in a range. Although Clemvox's believers retreated, the undead controlled by Naruto gathered. These silk threads that absorbed life fell on them. How naive. A large number of undead surrounded them. Naruto had a contemptuous expression and mocked, "Do you think you can defeat me by yourself?" Countless undead gathered. Every attack of Clemvox could cause a lot of damage to Naruto, and several undead nearby would fall. However, more undead were still gathering. There were at least tens of thousands of undead troops, and Naruto's believers behind them. Clemvox did not know how long it would take to kill these tens of thousands of undead. The god of suffering could not provide any help to the god of suffering now because many undead lords had stopped the broken monks. Naruto had not opened his divine shield so far. From the current situation he had the absolute advantage. "Do you want to fight?" Princess Royal's voice sounded. Soren shook his head and said, "No hurry. I'm waiting for someone to appear." The battle continued. Klemvox's power seemed to be endless. He ordered his church to attack the undead, and he kept attacking Naruto. His divine power was rapidly consumed. Although the undead nearby were not strong, there were still more or less high-grade undead that could attack him once, and each attack weakened his divine shield. This scene was so familiar. Last time, Klemvox was also besieged by countless undead liches, and these were forced to escape with serious injuries. Soren was waiting patiently, because he knew that there was still one existence who had not appeared, and she was very likely to be Klemvox's backup. Area Dispel Magic. Arcane Domain. When Klemvox's suppression became more and more obvious, suddenly a dazzling light of arcane magic emerged, followed by a powerful magic emerged and Naruto's life drain was dispelled. A beautiful figure appeared on the battlefield. Verges, the goddess of death and magic. Another god from another world. After she failed to win over Soren, she seemed to have reached some kind of agreement with Klemvox. At this moment she quickly dispelled Naruto's spell, and at the same time, cast a large-scale attack spell. Arcane Torrent. Energy Storm. Countless undead nearby fell, but then they were resurrected in Naruto's domain. In the face of the sudden appearance of the enemy, Naruto was very alert. He did not hesitate to open his divine shield, and at the same time, connected the touch of death to the nearby ancient mummies. These undead were difficult to be killed by large-scale spells, and at the same time, their vitality could also be absorbed. Smite of Destruction. Klemvox finally seized this opportunity. Powerful divine power gathered on the heavy sword, and a black light appeared, and he slashed wildly toward Naruto. Outside the battlefield, Soren finally made his move and said in a deep voice, "Activate the arcane tower." Plane waymark 115,245. High Priest, help me to lock the attack range with divine power. Indiscriminate attack within 3 kilometers. Even the Queen of Spiders could not resist the arcane crystal pulse cannon. The damage it caused to the divine shield was very terrifying. Just after all the targets appeared, Soren gave the order to attack, and the arcane tower in the city of Motor had already risen to a height of tens of thousands of meters. Gloria was responsible for driving the Mies nucleus, and the Fallen which was responsible for activating the elemental furnace. The energy of the entire arcane tower was activated to the limit, and then a dazzling light energy impact directly cut through the space. Boom. The battlefield in front of them was hit by a devastating bombardment in an instant. This was a crazy bombardment that did not distinguish between friend and foe. Whether it was Klemvox's church or Naruto's believers, they all suffered heavy losses in an instant. Countless skeletons were directly vaporized, and even legendary figures were killed instantly. Do it. When a round of ultra-long-range energy attacks was over, Soren's figure immediately entered the battlefield. The nearby space had been completely blocked. Neither Klemvox nor Naruto wanted the other party to escape. The terrible ultra-long-range energy attacks directly destroyed a part of the battlefield, and both Naruto and Klemvox were very embarrassed at the moment. Klemvox had consumed too much power at the beginning, and at this time his divine shield was about to dissipate. Cold ice and snow were flying. Within a range visible to the naked eye, the bodies of countless undead were quickly covered with a layer of white frost, and their movement speed and reaction speed were rapidly reduced. In the distance, in the arcane tower in the city of Motor, Gloria also gave an order at the moment when Soren attacked. She said in a serious voice, "Open the space waymark. Teleport the golem army. Activate the magic construct number 1. Activate the magic construct experimental body. Teleport the diamond golem into the battlefield. Thaling, prepare to open a large portal." Chapter 1084. It was impossible for Soren to wait for a winner to emerge from such a battle. Because whether it was Klemvox's death or Naruto's death, the power of death would be absorbed by the winner. At that time, a new greater divine power would be born. Once again, it proved how unreliable the goddesses of this world were. When the figures of Soren, Vivian, Lillian, and Princess Royal suddenly appeared on the battlefield, the goddess of death and magic Verges was aware of the presence of so many mid-level gods and above, and there was also a greater divine power, Soren. After suffering a super long-range energy attack from the arcane tower, she did not hesitate to use her special magic priesthood to teleport to the edge of the battlefield. Then, without even saying a word to Klemvox, she escaped on the spot. She escaped. She left in an unusually swift and decisive manner without any hesitation. She was a god from another world who came to this material plane for the sake of benefits. If there were benefits to be gained, she would naturally take action. But if she was in danger, then she would leave without hesitation. It was impossible for her to stay and fight to the death. For this little benefit, it was not worth for a mid-level god like her to risk her life. The Avatar crisis was about to end. As long as they lived to return to their divine kingdom, the gods still had countless years to enjoy and squander. If not for this, the first-generation goddess of wealth and the previous-generation goddess of magic would have tried their best to sneak back to their divine kingdom during the last Avatar crisis. Just like those goddesses who were close to Soren suddenly fell silent at this time, the goddess of death and magic also became a bitch in the face of life and death. She did not hesitate to betray the agreement with Klemvox. It seems that the only reliable ones are those around me. No wonder the god of light has such powerful divine power and there are so few members in the divine system. Most of them are personally cultivated gods because these old gods are not reliable at all. Soren watched as the goddess of death and magic fled, but he had no intention of stopping her. He could have stopped them, but Soren's targets were Klemvox and Naruto. The goddess of death and magic's escape meant that Soren had one less opponent, and also made him understand the nature of most of the goddesses in this world. He couldn't help but glance at Vivian, Lillian, and Princess Royal, who all wore solemn expressions. In such a battle of life and death, there was still someone who stood by his side and gave him their back. Obviously, he was much luckier than most of the other gods. The second round of ultra-long-range tactical attacks were scattered around the periphery. The home field had basically been cleared, but in order to prevent Naruto from resurrecting too many undead, Gloria controlled the arcane tower to carry out a second round of tactical attacks, clearing out most of the undead nearby. At the same time, Soren, Vivian, Lillian, and Princess Royal all attacked Klemvox in an instant. The reason why they did not choose Naruto was because he was an undead. It was more difficult to kill him than Klemvox, and his overall strength was currently a little stronger. Ice prison. Princess Royal pressed her hand on the ground, and the ice spread at a speed visible to the naked eye. In the blink of an eye, the area within hundreds of meters became a cage made entirely of ice. Sword of Annihilation. Although Lillian and Vivian could not defeat the enemy alone, the two of them together were close to the level of a great divine power. The Dread Lord was originally a great divine power, and his divinity and divinity were about 3 times that of an intermediate divine power. After this power was distributed to the Son of Fear, it gathered again. About 1/3 of it was absorbed by Soren, and the other 2/3 were divided between Vivian and Lillian. If a part of the divine power was excluded, then Vivian and Lillian together were equivalent to more than 1.5 intermediate divine powers. They were already qualified to participate in this battle. Avatar. Soren was still the main force in the battle. At the moment of the attack, he activated Avatar, and then his figure split into 2 and turned into a stream of light, slashing toward Klemvox in front of him. Rogue versus Warrior. Soren was not afraid of facing Klemvox head-on at all. Damn it. Klemvox was also covered in blood at the moment. He had consumed a lot of divine power earlier, and now he had to withstand a wave of superconducting pulse energy cannon. His divine shield was basically broken. He felt like he was very unlucky today. He encountered all kinds of bad luck, and the goddess of death and magic ran away without saying a word. He consumed a lot of divine power in the battle with Naruto, and this wave of energy attack also caused his church to suffer heavy losses. In this case, he and Soren were at an absolute disadvantage. Klemvox even had the idea of escaping, but the Princess Royal used her divine power to create an ice prison and directly trapped him inside. Divine power impact. With Naruto outside, Soren gave up most of his tactics and directly chose the simplest way. That was to completely suppress the enemy with divine power. Waves of divine power hit Klemvox. This was the most violent way for a god to fight. It was a battle of the divine power gap between the two sides. Divine power impact was divine damage, which ignored most resistance. The power consumed by one divine power impact was about enough to cast 1 or 2 legendary divine spells, which directly caused about 120 to 240 points of divine damage. This kind of damage was basically unavoidable. Mortals were likely to die in the face of it, and gods could only rely on their divine shield to resist. Convert Slaughter EXP. Soren's divine power seemed to be endless. After the first wave of impact, he began to convert the accumulated Slaughter EXP. Then his figure shuttled through the shadows and approached Klemvox's body. His opponent's injury was very serious. The opportunity was in an instant. If Klemvox was given a little time, he could cast greater restoration. Then his injury would be completely healed, and even if he had no divine power, he could still hold on for a while. Frozen Kingdom. Princess Royal also keenly grasped this opportunity. She raised her hands and activated the power of ice and snow. In an instant, everything was frozen in a range visible to the naked eye. Die. Soren's figure attacked from the left and right. Even Klemvox couldn't be sure which one was real and which one was fake. He futilely used the last of his divine power to hold up a shield, but the next moment, it was broken. Then a silver-white stream of light flashed across his body, and Klemvox's figure was directly split into two. Boom. It was as if the whole world was shaking. With the death of Klemvox, who had exhausted his power, the realm of eternal rest that shrouded the material plane suddenly collapsed, and the characteristics of the material plane also changed in an instant. The surging golden light spread out. As the former king of the dead, Klemvox had a very large amount of divine power. Most of this power poured into Soren's body, and a small part flew to Vivian and Lillian. Even the Princess Royal next to him and Naruto outside the frozen prison received a little bit of divine brilliance. However, most of the power was still absorbed by Soren. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.